Chapter 1102. People of the Gods. This term was sacred and distant, but at that moment, it seemed so real and so close. Brando was silent for a moment. He was so engrossed in the conversation that he didn't even notice that dozens of notifications had popped up in his records. His scholar level and several skills and knowledge under it had leveled up by more than 10 levels. But the latter didn't notice it at all. "I understand," he answered. "But Lady Ovina, you once said that I have the authority of the Society of Truth, but I never felt it. My power still comes from learning and accumulating experience, doesn't it? Is that really the case?" The spear spirit was a little amused. "How old are you?" Brando was stumped. He suddenly realized that he didn't quite understand this question, so he decided to bring the topic back to something he was familiar with. He thought for a moment, then continued with his previous question. "So what was the difference between the highest authority and the lowest authority that you mentioned before?" "The difference is huge. This determines which level of authority the person with the highest authority can use in the meeting. In the highest authority meeting, the first citizen has unlimited veto power. He can even force the meeting to end." Ovina glanced at him. "Just like you did." Brando couldn't help but feel sympathy for the Queen's misfortune. "She doesn't know. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But even if she did, she wouldn't have known that your authority would be so high. Her bloodline should come from Odin. Odin is the leader of the Earth Army and also an elder of the Truth Society. Their authority is second only to the first citizens. If you weren't there, she could have gotten everything she wanted. What does she want?" "I'm guessing that she wants to reopen the Truth Society." Brando frowned at the spear spirit. "You've already said that." Ovina shook her head. "What I'm talking about is a permanent parliament, just like before the Sixth Era. With a permanent parliament, Babel Tower will stay in the modern world. There will also be first citizens of the parliament who will stay for a long time. The chosen and the promised of your era will eventually grow up and become the next generation of first citizens of the gods, receiving the inheritance from the ancient times." Brando couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't this great? According to the Silver Queen's plan, if Babelta existed in the world, with the increase of the chosen ones, the civilization would eventually recover to a very high level, at least not inferior to before the era of mortals. Wouldn't that be much better than now? Then why was the Silver Queen acting so sneakily? He couldn't help but blurt out, "What's wrong with that?" Unexpectedly, this question made Ovina falter. She deliberated for a moment before answering. "Didn't the Bugis tell you the difference between the era of mortals and the era when gods still walked the earth?" Brando was stunned for a moment, wondering how the other party knew that he had met with Tumen, but then he realized that his alliance with the Bugis was obviously not a secret. He recalled what Tolman had told him. There seemed to be some relevant content in it, but he still did not understand how it was related. Could it be that if the mortal civilization continued to weaken, it would be able to deal with the growth of chaos? "It's hard for me to answer that question," Ovina answered. "Before the Truth Parliament closed, my master and I were fighting against Dusk and did not participate in the last meeting. They must have made some decisions during that meeting. I can only speculate based on that. But in the end, any question has to face the test of right and wrong, so whether it's good or bad in the end, I have no answer." At this moment Brendel suddenly thought of Sage Eloranta, thought of the Sacred Covenant, thought of the Buga people who kept everything that happened in the final battlefield a secret. He had a vague understanding in his heart, but he could not be sure. He shook his head gently. In this era of decline, it seemed that it was difficult for anyone to see the future clearly. The Silver Queen might have seen something that forced her to make such a decisive choice, but in the end, she died by his own hand. He asked himself if everything he did was right or wrong. There seemed to be no answer, but at least it wasn't worse than what happened in the game. Regarding this, could he only have a clear conscience? Where should mortals go from here? Perhaps only mortals themselves could answer this question. Then, Brando finally sorted out his thoughts and asked, I have one last question, and it's the answer I want to know the most right now. I want to ask, when the Silver Queen initiated the meeting, did she count me as one of the 3 initiators? Of course not, Ovina answered without hesitation. From what I can see, she never even saw you as an opponent. She cared a lot about Odin's legacy in you, but that's all there is to it. Legacy is legacy, bloodline is bloodline, these are 2 different things. At this point, she couldn't help but laugh. But she's a little stupid. If you don't have the bloodline of the divine people in you, why would Odin give you his legacy? If you weren't the chosen one, or the promised one, no matter how hard a mortal tried, they wouldn't be able to enter the Truth Parliament. Brando didn't find this funny. In fact, his face darkened. Scarlet was the only one around who noticed the change in her lord's expression. She subconsciously moved closer. Then who was the initiator of the meeting? As a Knight of the Azure Sky, was Scarlet a participant? Brando asked. Of course not, Ovina immediately denied. Although the Knight of the Azure Sky usually participates in the meeting, this time we were there as recorders, not participants. According to the rules, recorders are not allowed to participate in the meeting. If I remember correctly, that Prince Ogios should be a chosen one. Brando recalled. Most chosen ones had their own flaws. That Prince Ogios looked like a maniac. Judging from his strength and performance, it wasn't hard to come to this conclusion. Then other than him and Her Majesty, who was the 3rd participant? I'm not too sure about that, but that person had a very high level of authority, no less than Her Majesty. Ovina shook her head. Is he here? Brando immediately asked. He's not here, but I think he's in this city. Brando took a deep breath. He had a vague idea of a possibility. Why would the Silver Queen know about the Roman? Why would she specially invite the Roman to the Empire? Why was Princess Gloria seen near Bragg's? Also, why didn't his grandfather ever tell him about everything around him? Everything was too much of a coincidence. It was as if a broken chain had been reconnected. The cause and effect of everything automatically appeared in his mind. He felt a little regret. Perhaps allowing the little Roman to come here was a serious mistake. Once he thought about the possibility that the Roman was the baby girl from 60 years ago, and that there was a great secret hidden within her, Brando suddenly felt like he couldn't sit still. He subconsciously wanted to walk out of the Garden of White Roses. But Medisha and the Shire immediately stopped him. Although they weren't standing as close as Scarlet, they were also constantly monitoring their lord's movements. His conversation with Ovina could be hidden from normal people, but as planeswalker creatures who were closely connected to Brando, they could hear it. My lord, you can't go out. My lord, what are you trying to do? It's getting late. Miss Ko Hua's puppies outside won't recognize you as her master. Besides, who knows what the cultists are up to in the outer city? Medisha looked at Brando's gloomy face and asked in a small voice, My lord, are you worried about the Roman? Brando looked at her and nodded silently. But he couldn't explain all the reasons at once. He was about to speak when a figure appeared in front of him. It was the witch he saw at the Cat and Whiskering. He didn't know when she had appeared at the front gate of the Garden of White Roses. She slowly walked through the crowd and no one asked her anything. It was as if she was supposed to be there. The witch came before Brando and looked at him silently. After a while, she said, Something has happened to the Roman. You must leave immediately. Brando was stunned. It was as if there was a sharp dagger in this woman's words. When she opened her mouth, it stabbed at the most fearful part of his heart. He took a deep breath before he came back to his senses. He looked at the other party and asked, Who are you? The witch took off her veil without hesitation. At that moment, Brando almost thought that he saw several faces. Some of them were even quite familiar to him. It seemed that he had seen them somewhere recently. But in the end, he saw the real appearance of the other party. Princess Gloria was not beautiful. Among the excellent bloodlines of the Corcava royal family, she could only be regarded as ordinary. She was far from her niece, Griffine, who had elven blood. But her temperament was rarely seen by Brando. Perhaps it was the years of living as a witch that shrouded her with a mysterious aura. Under this aura, this lady gave people a feeling that was difficult to describe with simple words. Brando had only seen a similar temperament on one person, and that person was now in front of him. She had another name in the countryside of Butchie. The locals called her Lady Isaiah, but in front of the Roman and him, she had always called herself Aunt Jenny. This was a middle-aged woman, but the traces of time left on her face were not many. Aunt Jenny, you should have guessed who I am, Princess Gloria replied. Now I allow you to use my real name. What I want to tell you is that your guess is basically correct. The Roman was indeed raised by me. Perhaps you still have a lot of doubts in your heart, but now you must listen to me and leave here immediately. Why? Brando froze. The others also frowned and looked at the other party. Among them, the Silver Elf Princess and the Shire had already vaguely guessed the other party's identity. Scarlet and Mephistopheles had a look of vigilance. As for Enrich, she yawned and revealed her sharp canine teeth. There's no time, but I will explain it to you. Gloria's face was a little serious. Go find Nydivan and Vala. I want to borrow Cruz's long-range teleportation formation. They won't agree. That's Cruz's secret. Brando immediately shook his head. Before he understood the situation, he would never leave the Roman behind. They will. Gloria seemed to turn a blind eye to his attitude. You are the new emperor of the empire. If they don't want the two emperors to die on the same day. What? Madam, what did you say? Not only Brando, but everyone around him was stunned. Even Vahina, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but speak. The Silver Queen gave you the Ring of Supremacy, so you are the Emperor of the Empire. Apart from you, no one else can touch this position before you die. This is the rule set by the Flame King Gretel. Even the nobles of Cruz and the Crown Prince can't go against this rule. So go tell Nydivan and Vala, let me talk to them. Brando was silent. He faintly felt that something was wrong, but his right hand was tightly gripping the hilt of the flame blade. Princess Gloria silently watched his expression and shook her head. Brando, don't be stubborn. You will understand in the future how important what I said to you today is. Aunt Jenny. Brando hesitated for a moment, but still chose to call her by the name he was more familiar with. But he never dreamed that he would meet the Roman again under such circumstances. You should understand that I will never abandon the Roman. No matter what happened to her, I will find her. He paused and said with some difficulty, even if she is dead, I will at least see the body of my fiancé. Gloria stared at the young man. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She is not dead. In the end, the former princess of the Empire sighed. I promise you, the Roman will be fine, but you have to leave here first, okay? No. Brando still shook his head. In reality, he had already planned to force his way past her and go to the outer city to find the Roman. Even though he had only spoken with Ovina for a short while, his heart was already burning with anxiety. But at that moment, someone in the rose garden suddenly screamed, Martha above, look at the moon. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads, and their eyes widened. That lonely black moon hanging in the sky was actually falling. The entire world seemed to resonate with it and trembled slightly. That scene. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. But Brando vaguely felt that he had seen the same scene somewhere before. P.S. I spent a lot of time organizing my thoughts and writing the outline of this volume today, so I wrote it a little late. When I finished, it was already 10 o'clock. Chapter 1103. The dark moon was torn apart in the sky. At first, its speed was extremely slow to the naked eye. People saw the moon slowly split into several larger fragments in mid-air. They slowly separated, and then dense cracks appeared on the surface of the moon. It suddenly expanded and split into countless smaller fragments. These fragments broke free from the gravitational force between each other and flew in all directions. Such a picture scroll was extremely quiet in the eyes of the crowd at first, but gradually it began to move faster. A few minutes later, the scattered fragments began to penetrate the clouds, pulling out long golden-red flaming tails. It was as if there was a steel rain in the sky. At first, there were specks of light, and then golden lines slowly drew out in the sky, densely packed and lighting up the sky. The sky began to gradually become brighter, as if the clouds were burning. The light of the meteorite fragments reflected half of the sky into a golden-red doomsday-like color. The golden lines were reflected in Brando's dark brown eyes. The golden-red sky, the meteorites falling through the clouds. He recalled when he had seen such a scene before. It was in the dream of the battle with White. The scene in front of him was almost exactly the same as what he saw in the second dream. A voice boomed in his head. The twilight of the myriad worlds, the twilight of the gods. There was dead silence in the rose garden. The entire capital of the empire and even the Bancal region were shrouded in the bright light of destruction. How could people react in the face of such a scene? Before the end of the world, who could protect themselves? At this time, the larger fragments had begun to enter the clouds, and the thick clouds were suddenly cleared. Like a giant wolf made of light and shadow, they rushed out of the clouds and howled in the air. Their voices were distant and sad, as if they were singing a funeral song for the end of a world. There was a rumbling sound in the air, like some kind of magic resonance. The air vibrated, and waves of air fell from the sky and hit the ground. With a few cracking sounds, a few long cracks appeared on the ground of the white rose garden. These cracks extended all the way to the square outside. The crowd immediately staggered. Only then did most of the nobles react, screaming and looking for cover. Men were pushing and shoving women. The noblewomen and young ladies were wailing. Angry shouts and voices trying to maintain order filled the air. The scene was chaotic. It was like a drama unfolding before Brando's eyes, but at this moment, he was surprisingly calm. It was just like the last battle in the Alkash Mountains, when the undead swarmed into the battlefield like a tide. He didn't have the slightest fear in his heart. He only had thoughts of how to get rid of the enemy in front of him. Black Tea had once said that he was a natural-born warrior. Senior Allium Japonicum had also felt sorry for him when she left. She told him that if he had more resources, a stronger empire, or a stronger guild, his achievements might be even greater. However, Brando didn't care. His sword would only appear for things that he recognized. He turned his head, pointed to the chaotic scene, and said to everyone present, "Medisha, you go and maintain order. Find a way to persuade the Flame Family Knight Regiment to open the royal tunnel and let everyone hide in it. The Shire, you go and find Prime Minister Nydivan and the Holy See of Walla. Only they have the authority to control these people. Mephistopheles, Andrique, you go and protect the Duke of Flowers and his family, as well as the nobles who came with us and the young man." The Shire, who always liked to make fun of his lord, was silent at this moment. Obviously, he understood the priorities. The four nodded and left. Only Scarlet and the three Valkyries were left by Brando's side. Veronica and Lady Sydney went to the nobles. As people of the Empire, they couldn't stay out of the Silver Queen's death. Princess Gloria looked at this scene and shook her head gently. "It's useless to hide there. You have to leave here." Brendel was silent for a moment before he replied, "I won't go anywhere without her. It's useless for you to stay. But if I don't stay, I will regret it." Princess Gloria looked at him steadily. "I'll go with you." "No," Brando shook his head, "I'll go alone." "You can't be willful. Do you know why the Silver Queen gave you that ring?" It's just a ring. No one will take it seriously. Brando shook his head indifferently. Even if the old Prime Minister and Walla agreed, what could it prove? The nobles of the Empire couldn't let an heroine rule them. They couldn't change the will of the entire empire. How many people's interests were intertwined? Princess Gloria didn't argue with him and only replied, "It's not just a ring. You're an adult, Brando, no longer a boy. It's precisely because I'm an adult. Since you're an adult, you should understand that those things can't be done." There's nothing that can't be done. Brando hated this kind of aristocratic argument. There are only things that should be done and things that shouldn't be done. For example, going to your death. It's not going to my death, Aunt Jenny, Brando replied. I don't want to argue with you. I hope you can do me a favor. If that's the case, then you have to listen to me. Princess Gloria replied without backing down. No, there's no room for discussion. Brando shook his head. Aunt Jenny, I don't care if the Roman is the baby girl from 60 years ago, but at least I know that she was raised by you. I believe in the relationship between you and the Roman. The Roman once told me that she wanted to become a merchant so that she could make money and buy you a lot of good things. Speaking up to this point, he suddenly stopped. That somewhat naive girl, perhaps the richest people she saw in Butchie were the merchants who came and went from village to village. He could still remember the time when he and Romaine were haggling with those guys over a small amount of things. Romaine's bag was filled with all sorts of strange treasures, all of which were bought with the money that they had saved up bit by bit. To be able to become a merchant and make money was her biggest dream. Brando felt that something was stuck in his throat, to the extent that he couldn't say anything else. He just looked at the ladder without saying a word. The expression on Princess Gloria's face finally softened. What do you want me to help you with? You have to first tell me what happened to the Roman. Brando replied. A part of the Dusk Dragon's will is sealed in her body. If this seal is removed, then the Dusk Dragon is likely to take over her body and descend into this world. Princess Gloria replied word by word. The screams of the crowd seemed to be far away at this moment, and the surrounding sounds became illusory. Brando didn't say a word, and the two of them were so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. But the latter didn't say a word, not because of shock. In fact, he already had a faint guess in his heart, but when this guess was confirmed, he still felt suffocated. Back then, the Silver Queen, Darius, and the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn found a baby girl on the final battlefield. That baby girl is today's Roman, but when the three of them found the baby girl was in a dormant state. It was the Silver Queen who inadvertently awakened the latter, and then discovered that the Dusk Dragon's will was sealed in the Roman's body. Gloria continued, at that time, the Dusk Dragon was about to descend, but the Silver Queen, who realized that she had caused a disaster, resolutely decided to sacrifice herself to reseal the baby girl. A seal that can seal the Dusk Dragon's will can be repaired so easily. Besides, a method like sacrificing one's life doesn't seem like something that Her Majesty of that era could understand, right? Brando suddenly asked. Naturally, someone told her, and this person was the Dragon Queen. In fact, I've always suspected that the Silver Queen accidentally broke the seal because she was tempted by her, but the Silver Queen is already dead, and I'm afraid only the Dragon Queen can answer this puzzle. And then? Brando continued to ask coldly. But the Dragon Queen only took half of the Silver Queen's soul to complete the seal, using her kind and pure personality to suppress the dark side of the Roman character. According to the Dragon Queen's claim, she did this to save the Silver Queen's life. Just a few minutes ago, she killed the Silver Queen with her own hands. Brando interrupted her disdainfully. Princess Gloria also nodded. So her statement is not worth believing. The Dragon Queen may have other intentions, but we don't know. The Silver Queen's kind side was used to suppress the dark side of the Roman character. Does this dark side belong to the Dusk Dragon? Princess Gloria shook her head. The Roman is the Roman, and the Dusk Dragon is the Dusk Dragon. Although the Roman has the will of the dusk dragon sealed in her body, she is a true first-generation divine with a complete soul. It's just that before the dusk dragon was unsealed, because of the influence of the will of the dusk dragon, the dark side of her character was much greater than that of ordinary people. But I've never felt it, Brando replied. In my memory, the Roman has never even cried, let alone negative emotions. Generally speaking, this is because of the influence of the kind side of Her Royal Highness. Also, I used a witch's secret method to seal the negative emotions of the Roman, so it's not that she won't cry, but that she can't cry. Noticing Brando's gaze, Princess Gloria smiled bitterly. It's not what you think. I also have my own difficulties. When your grandfather gave the Roman to me, she was still sleeping in the crystal. Originally, the Silver Queen wanted him to kill the Roman, but the Roman had half of Her Majesty's soul, so your grandfather couldn't do it in the end. Later, I left the Empire with the Roman and came to live in seclusion near Bragg's. But after all, the spells of mortals are not as good as Odin and the Witch Queen. The Roman also slept in the crystal for 40 years. It was not until a year after you were born that the first seal on the crystal began to dissipate. After that, she also woke up and began to grow up like a normal girl, and the seal also began to become unstable at that time. When the Roman was young, she was often controlled by dark emotions. I was afraid that the Twilight Dragon would be unsealed because of this, so I had to seal her negative emotions. When did that happen? When the Roman was 7 or 8 years old. Impossible, Brando shook his head. At that time, I was already in Butchie. How could I not know? My impression of the Roman is no different from the present. Speaking of this, he suddenly stopped and looked at the former princess of the kingdom in front of him. Gloria showed a helpless expression. The memories of you, Freya, and the Roman have been modified by me. Because of some things, I left you something. After you leave here, you will understand everything that happened at that time. I hope you didn't lie to me this time, Aunt Jenny. Brando. Princess Gloria showed a sad expression. I'm sorry, Brando sighed. I understand your feelings for me, the Roman, and Freya, Aunt Jenny, but this time it was really beyond my expectations. I understand, Princess Gloria shook her head gently. You can go find the Roman. I probably understand your thoughts. Before that, I still need you to do me a favor, Aunt Jenny. Say it. The ring you told me about, the Supreme Ring. If it really has such great authority, then I hope you can help me persuade the old Prime Minister and the Great Holy See of Walla to agree to open the long-distance teleportation circle of the royal family and send Medisha and the others away. Of course it has. Gloria's lips moved. She wanted to tell him that the ring represented more than he thought. The greatest treasure left by the Flame King was not the vast territory and supreme power of the Empire. Any successor with the royal blood in their body could be the Emperor of the Empire, but not anyone could become the Flame King. But in the end, she didn't say it. She understood that some things couldn't be forced. That ring, Brendel continued, I'll return it to His Highness after I'm done with it. I have no intention of becoming a king, and I have no intention of getting involved in this whirlpool of disputes. Besides, His Highness is considered my friend. It is His Royal Highness' fortune to have a friend like you, but this ring won't be in his hands. A voice interrupted. Brando turned around and found that it was Lady Veronica. The latter had just returned with a worried look on her face. This matter doesn't need to go through the Prime Minister. I can agree to open the long-distance teleportation circle of the royal family. But I don't think the two lords will object even if they know. Not only Medisha and the others, but also a large number of nobles and envoys from various countries must be teleported away. Otherwise, there will be big trouble. Brando then remembered something and said to the latter. Then I'll have to trouble you, Army Commander. Send my regards to Princess Magadol and thank her very much for her help. Veronica nodded and looked at him silently. You have to be careful too. Chapter 1104. Brendel nodded solemnly to Veronica and then nodded to Princess Gloria, who was beside her. Gloria looked at him silently. She had lived in seclusion in Butchie for decades. She had watched the Roman, Freya, and Brando grow up. Although she was not the parents of these 3 children, her feelings for them were not inferior. Now that the children had grown up, they had their own choices for the future. Brando, don't force yourself. But in the end, he could not help but remind him, you don't understand how important you are to this world. Brando did not answer. If he did, it would only weaken his determination. He turned around and looked at Scarlet behind him. Just as he was about to say something, she unexpectedly took the initiative to speak. I'll wait for you in Tonagel, my lord. Brando could not help but be stunned. He probably never thought that the Highlander girl who had always relied on him would say such words. He thought that it would take a lot of effort to make her stay. It was not that he did not want to bring Scarlet and the others, but because he really did not have the confidence in his heart. The black moon had fallen, and the wolf was roaming the world. No matter how he looked at it, this was the sign of dusk. And the meteor in the sky was about to hit the ground. Who knew what would happen? He still had his own unyielding will, but he could not guarantee the safety of Medisha and the others. So this time, he did not even plan to bring the planeswalker creatures with him. He entrusted them all to Princess Gloria to teleport them to a safe place. He had already decided to go to the outer city alone. Scarlet looked up at her lord. Miss Roman needs your help. I don't want to be a burden to you. One day, I will definitely fight side by side with you. Brando could not help but smile with relief. After going through so many things, in his eyes, this Highlander girl had finally grown up. She could finally see her own heart and firmly grasp her fate in her own hands. You will. You used to be the strongest warrior in Hades. Have you forgotten, Scarlet? I believe that you will be the same in the future. You are the Knight of Azure, no worse than anyone else. Perhaps the next time I see you, you will have lived up to your name in the legends. Scarlet hummed softly. She lowered her eyelids slightly, her heart filled with happiness. Brando looked at everyone in the courtyard, then turned and walked out of the White Rose Garden. When he passed through the main gate, he heard someone call his name behind him. Sir Brando, Count. The voice shouted from afar. I'm Henriette, and Bradjet is my grandfather. He was once beaten to a pulp by your grandfather. You may not remember the name, but it doesn't matter. I challenge you to a duel. Remember, you still have Henriette to fight. Conrad pulled his friend back and glared at him. You're crazy. Henriette looked regretfully at Brando's back disappearing into the darkness. He shook his head. Of course I'm not crazy. It's a pity. I still want to find him and make friends. Then why did you challenge him? Conrad was so shocked that he almost forgot about the doomsday scene in the sky. Is there a conflict between the two? Henriette replied proudly. I challenge the Count to protect the honor of my family. Regardless of whether I win or lose, as a descendant of my grandfather, I must set an example. However, I admire the Count from the bottom of my heart, and I am willing to form a friendship with the Count. This is my personal matter, and there is nothing wrong with it. Even if I die in the Count's hands, it only proves that I am not skilled enough. After a pause, the young man said matter-of-factly, besides, did you hear what Lady Veronica and the others said? Her Majesty the Queen has given the Ring of Supremacy to the Count. Isn't it a win-win situation to build a good relationship with the future Emperor? No, Conrad shook his head. I think the crux of the problem is that you want to duel with His Majesty the Emperor. Then I will do it before he ascends to the throne. The question was, could the Count really ascend to the throne? Conrad couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Freya felt like she was in a strange dream. The pale full moon, the dark night sky, and the shadows of the black pine forest in the distance. The moonlight illuminated everything clearly. A wooden and stone farmhouse that was common in the countryside of Bucci, with a barn and a stable beside it. The fields in the distance seemed to be shrouded in a layer of silver. Fields of barley swayed slightly in the night breeze. This was the most common scene in the countryside of Bucci at the end of summer. But she faintly felt that she had seen a similar scene before, and it wasn't a dream. This memory fragment lingered in her mind, but she couldn't get rid of it. She thought about it repeatedly, but could only come up with some trivial conclusions. It was meaningless. But she knew that she was dreaming. She stood in the courtyard, with the road leading to the forest behind her and the open door of the farmhouse in front of her. She remembered this place. Before the Roman and her aunt moved to the hill where Brando's old house was, they lived here. This place should be behind a small forest outside the village, next to a field. The black pine forest behind her also confirmed her guess. But what she didn't understand was how she could return to this place in her dream. She only had a little impression of this place when she was very, very young. She only remembered that there was a fire here, and then the Roman and her aunt moved to a place further away from the village. But it was strange that most of the elders in the village didn't have any impression of this fire. When others talked about it, they didn't talk about it in detail. It was not that they wanted to hide anything, but it was as if the memory was too long ago and too vague. But after the incident, people said, "Thank God, Martha, no one was hurt." Freya stood in this scene with some curiosity. The memories of Bucci and her childhood seemed to be something that happened a long time ago. Although she often remembered her aunt's family in her dreams, and recalled the tragic war. But she didn't expect that she would dream of coming to Roman and her aunt's first home the day before the war. This dream was so clear. She felt a little emotional and couldn't help but walk into the farmhouse. She couldn't help but think about what she would see. Would she see the little Roman and Aunt Jenny from that time? She suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen Aunt Jenny for a long time since the fall of Bucci. Although the people in the village didn't like Roman and her aunt, she had an inexplicable sense of closeness to Aunt Jenny. It seemed to be the same for Brando. In the village, only the three children had the best relationship with Aunt Jenny. Unfortunately, Brando would only come to the village every summer. When winter came, he would go back to Bragg's. Before the fall of Bucci, she had never been to Bragg's. She had only heard about this city from Brando and other people's descriptions. Freya didn't expect that one day she would go to so many places and come to Tonagel, which was so far away from Bucci. But her nostalgia for her hometown never stopped. With such strange thoughts, she walked into the house quietly. Then she was stunned. The house was a mess. Broken cabinets, overturned tables, chairs, collapsed stairs, and even a wall had collapsed. All kinds of utensils were scattered on the ground. Then there was blood. Bright blood. The moonlight flowed into the house through the hole, illuminating everything. The bright red blood was also quietly reflected on the walls, the floor, and everywhere. She saw two corpses with pale skin. One of them was even torn in half, with internal organs scattered on the ground. The other was on the bed, with a big hole in the back where the heart was. Freya shuddered. She swore that she had never seen the owner of these two corpses, nor had she ever seen anything like this. But she felt a sense of familiarity in her heart, as if all of this had really happened before. She looked around anxiously. A low sobbing sound entered her ears. The sound was full of uneasiness and fear, as if it was so helpless that it made her heart ache. Roman. She immediately recognized the voice and subconsciously turned around. Sure enough, she saw a small figure standing there, sobbing softly. It was the Roman in her memory. He was only 7 or 8 years old, but there was a faint trace of him. Freya suddenly remembered that in her memory, the Roman had never cried so sadly. The only time he saw her cry was when the two of them got lost in the Black Forest. She remembered that time when she slipped and fell into a mountain stream. The scar was still on her back. In the end, it was the Roman who carried her out of the forest. She still remembered that after that, the two of them made a solemn vow that they would never be weak, afraid, and would never cry again. Although it was just a child's vow, Roman seemed to have really kept his promise after that and never cried again. On the contrary, since childhood, she had been crying. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but blush slightly. When she participated in the militia training, she didn't know how many times she cried in private because of the poor results. But Freya immediately woke up. She didn't understand what was going on with this dream. Was it just a simple nightmare? Or was it a sign? Witches were superstitious about the power of dreams. Although Freya was not a witch, at this moment, she felt that she was sober and not in a dream. She walked over and gently hugged the crying little Roman. She softly asked, "What's wrong?" I killed my father and mother, Freya." "What did you say?" Freya was stunned. "Where did your father and mother come from? Haven't you always lived with your aunt?" I don't know." "Whoa, what should I do? My father drank and wanted to hit my mother. I don't know what happened." Whoa. "Roman, wake up. This is just a dream. Nothing like this has ever happened." The little Roman didn't seem to hear it. She sobbed and asked, "Freya, I killed my father and mother. What should I do?" She suddenly raised her head and looked at Freya nervously. "Freya, will you tell the others? They will come to kill me, right?" "Roman, what are you talking about? You will do that, right? Roman, wake up. This is just a dream." Freya subconsciously pressed on the other person's shoulder, wanting to shake her awake. She seemed to have forgotten that she was also in a dream. But just as her hands touched the Roman's shoulder, she saw the other person raise her head. There was no white in her eyes, no pupils, only a dark void. Roman looked at her coldly. "Freya, you are a traitor." I didn't." "Roman, what's wrong with you?" Freya was shocked. "You are a traitor. Everyone has betrayed me. You are all the same." Roman said coldly. "No, Roman, how could we betray you? And Brando, he will always be by your side." Freya asked carefully, "Roman, what's wrong with your eyes?" But Roman's little face showed a painful expression, and Brando, where are you?" Just as Freya was about to say something, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down and saw a gleaming dagger stuck in her chest. She raised her head in disbelief and looked at the little girl in her arms. "Roman. You took away Brando," Roman replied faintly. "I'm going to kill you." "No," Freya almost screamed, sitting up from her bed in cold sweat. She raised her head. It was dark all around. She was still in her room in Abby's castle. She froze for a moment, then realized that she just had a nightmare. "Miss Freya." Su Xiaoxin's voice came from outside the door. "I'm fine," Freya hurriedly replied. "It was just a nightmare." "Haven't you slept yet?" "I can't sleep. Miss Roman has gone to the Empire. There are too many things left for the Chamber of Commerce in Ampere Seal. Miss Roman trusts me so much, I have to live up to her trust." Hearing the word Roman, Freya's heart thumped again. She felt a little uneasy and asked subconsciously, "Is there any news from the Lord?" "No, Mississippi. Since Captain Yuta and the others sent back the news from the Evergreen Corridor, there has been no follow-up." The voice outside the door paused for a moment, then replied, "This is normal. The Empire has long lost control south of the Evergreen Corridor. It's normal that they can't send back news. But Captain Yuta and the others are traveling with our fleet. There shouldn't be a problem on the way. Freya wanted to say that she was actually worried about Brando and Roman, but she thought about it and didn't say it. She silently recalled the previous dream, but suddenly, she was stunned. That's, something in her mind seemed to shatter, and countless dusty memories were suddenly released. Freya's face was pale, and she couldn't help but tremble and lean against the edge of the bed. Brando, Roman, she. Chapter 1105. The fine golden lines in the sky finally connected with the vast horizon. Pieces of the moon fell to the ground one after another. Not only in the Bankel region, not only in the Cruz Empire, but also in every corner of the Wond. Disaster struck at the same time. The burning debris flew over the forest, and the forest immediately turned into a sea of fire. The natives of the forest, such as deer, badgers, bears, and other wild animals, fled in panic. The residents of the town could only watch helplessly as the rats ran into the streets in groups, as if they had gone mad. The dogs were barking wildly, and the stray cats and domestic cats all climbed onto the roofs, letting out strange cries like they were in heat. A beam of golden light streaked across the sky and fell into the horizon. Bang! A spot of light lit up in the distance, and a moment later, 3 spots of light shone densely together. The shock wave arrived a few seconds later, and the place close to the point of impact vaporized. Anything made of wood, including trees, instantly caught fire. Within a few seconds, everything was completely oxidized and turned into charcoal. Humans and livestock were directly turned into dust. The high temperature licked the ground, and the quartz in the sand immediately crystallized into shining glass. In a place a little further away, the airflow turned into a hurricane and swept through the town, rolling up all the odds and ends. The white iron signboards clanged desperately, and the streets were filled with the screams, shouts, cries, and the sounds of bottles and jars breaking. People saw the airflow rolling up smoke and dust several miles high. Lakes and rivers were sucked into the sky by the hurricane, and then fell back down. Dead fish splashed on the roofs. In some places, when the burning debris swept across the sky, thousands of miles of swamps and lakes were evaporated. The hot air rapidly rose, and then fell down as torrential rain and hail. The temperature of the ground rapidly dropped, and in the blink of an eye, it was covered in ice and snow. A blizzard whistled as it attacked. In Luokeki, the cult of the Black Flame even came out to celebrate. But soon, the local garrison was alerted, and the two sides fought fiercely until rivers of blood flowed. The largest meteorite flew over the heads of both sides, and the high temperature ignited everything that could be ignited. Even the metal turned into liquid and fell to the ground, and then solidified again. The robes of the cult of the Black Flame were mostly made of linen, so the ignition point was even lower. Balls of fire rolled on the ground, wailing, or ran all over the street. The water wells had long evaporated, and even the whole street looked like a scorched hell. The destructive shock wave took away everything in an instant. The meteor crashed into the border of Broken Sword Mountain Range, and the explosion triggered a terrible geological disaster, a volcanic eruption followed by an earthquake. The ground sank, and the mountains and rivers moved. Everything within a radius of thousands of miles was turned into ruins. Villages, towns, humans, and livestock were all buried. Half an hour later, a brand new rift valley appeared on the map. It spanned hundreds of miles and even caused the sublime inland sea to flow backwards, forming a future lake. The Rock Kaki province had completely disappeared from the Empire's map, along with the 1.3 million people living there. But in Erewhon, it was a different story. Freya, who was awakened by a nightmare, heard the screams in the yard outside. She put on her clothes and opened the window. It was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, but the sky was shining with a fiery red light. Bright spots of light pierced through the clouds, falling towards Menta, Radnor, and the Erech Highlands in the north, or Karsuk, Grinoires, and Vero in the east. A large flare was splitting the clouds overhead. The golden-red clouds were like flowing oil, cut in half by a blazing hot knife. The flare extended in a radial direction, heading straight for the Black Forest in the south of Abes. As it swept past the Greyhaw Ridge, sparks of fire appeared on the mountain. The servants ran around the yard like headless flies, shouting and yelling. The maidservants were carrying basins to fetch water because the stable was on fire. Freya frowned as she stood by the window, shouting, "Bring my horse out, I'm going to see the princess in Valhalla. The rest of you, organize people to put out the fire. The rest of you, open the cellar. Let the women and children hide underground." Just as she finished speaking, a strange scene appeared. Amidst the mountains of Chablis, above a lake surrounded by a tranquil forest, a pillar of light rose from the center of the lake and shot into the sky. Then, south of Trondheim, in the direction of the loop of trade winds, a second pillar of light rose. Near Brags, in the valley where the saint's legacy was, a third pillar of light rose. Then, a pillar of light rose from Cipher, Grey Mountain, Corvado, Radnor, and Lantaneilen. 8 pillars of light shone in the night sky, supporting the sky above Erewhon. A moment later, a series of dense flashes exploded above the clouds, and the falling debris seemed to have crashed into an invisible barrier. In the sky above Coldwood Castle, a golden ring of flame was spreading out. The sky was rumbling, and the falling meteorites were being torn apart. Then, a series of even denser explosions sounded, and the clouds seemed to have been ignited. Strong winds blew down from the sky, and the sound of tiles falling off could be heard from the castle. The black pine forest in the surroundings was like a wheat field in autumn, falling to the ground. The servants were stunned by the miraculous scene in the night sky. Freya was also speechless for a long time. She ordered the servants to bring her horse out, closed the window, and returned to the house. Sue opened the door and walked in. She had folded her military uniform in her hands. Freya looked at her gratefully and took the clothes from her hands. She changed out of her nightgown and said, "Thank you, Sue." Sue went behind her and used her hands to lift up the goddess of war's long hair, carefully braiding it. This was a trivial action, but Sue's hands were extremely nimble. When she braided the hair behind Freya's ears, she stopped. Freya felt her actions and asked, "What's wrong?" "Will we die, Miss Freya?" "Everyone will die. Nobles, generals, ministers, merchants and servants, there will be a day when they cannot escape the judgment of time. My father once said that after a person dies, they will gradually lose themselves. Their names will gradually fade from the memories of their loved ones, and in the end, they will completely disappear from this world. I had many relatives when I was young, but they all died. I don't even remember the names of most of them. Miss Freya, if I die one day, will you remember me?" Freya turned around and looked at this Redo's daughter. "Why do you think that?" She then thought of something. Is it because of the undead invasion? Recently, I have often dreamed of me and my father escaping from Fortress Reden. That was indeed a terrifying experience, but thank you for saving me, Sue. Sue stared blankly without saying anything. After a long silence, she finally said, "I like you, Miss Freya." "I also like you, Sue. Haven't we been friends for a long time?" Freya smiled faintly, but she immediately became silent again. She thought of the scene in the nightmare and felt extremely worried. Sue continued to braid her hair silently. "Sue, you braid my hair so well. I'm almost used to having you by my side." Freya suddenly thought of her aunt's family. Yes. Half an hour ago, the first meteorite finally hit Lushta, the 1,000-year-old capital. The debris carried a long tail of flames and high temperature as it spun and fell outside the city, completely evaporating a nearby river. Then, the resulting shockwave hit Lushta's white wall that was more than 10 miles away. After 1,000 years, Iroma's protection once again protected the city. A bright halo lit up on the white wall, blocking nearly 2/3 of the impact. The remaining shockwaves scattered into the city, directly turning half of the southern part of the city into a barren land. The 3 canals in the city immediately boiled and evaporated, hot steam rising into the sky. Great flames were ignited everywhere, producing roiling smoke that mixed with the water vapor, enveloping the skies above the entire outer city. In the Shoemaker district, next to the Dud River, between the 16 and 19 Oaks, there was a seafood store called Hippide. The owner of the store was a country bumpkin named Hill, a title that mixed with the pride of the imperial capital's people. He mainly dealt with the transportation and management of seafood between the sublime inland sea and the imperial capital. Because he monopolized the business of the nobles, he was rather famous. When the disaster happened, this famous old store was like most of the stores on this street, turned into a sea of flames. Under creaking sounds, it collapsed with a loud rumble. Fortunately, the store owner went to the White Maple Forest for a vacation that night, luckily escaping this disaster. The fire burned for a few minutes. The stone door of the nearby cellar was pushed open by a small gray hand. A little boy crawled out from inside. When he landed on the ground, he couldn't help but jump up from the heat. Behind him, a tall young man crawled out, followed by a girl with thick eyebrows. The 3 of them took out pots and pans and other utensils from the cellar, hurriedly ran to the nearby Dud River to fill them with water, and then started to put out the fire. After the fire was put out, they hurriedly turned over the burning bricks and wood, and took out all kinds of seafood that were mostly cooked and roasted from the ruins of the seafood store. These seafood were filled to the brim with a few wooden boxes, and then they crawled back into the cellar with the boxes. At the moment, there were 7 or 8 people sitting in the cellar, both men and women. One of them was wearing a black robe of the secret society. He was a young man with curly hair and sweaty forehead. The thick hood of his robe was pulled down. When the girl with thick eyebrows climbed down the ladder, he was still loudly preaching to the others, "Lady Aroma has arrived. The flames of vengeance will surely evolve everything." The girl with thick eyebrows stood on the side with a box in her arms, listening to the speech with great interest. Behind him was the tall young man. When he came down, he glared at the young man and said, "Shut up. How can you tell me to shut up?" The young man said angrily, "Are you the Queen's lackey?" Old Granny is a believer of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. She has been a devout believer of Lady Martha for 80 years. If you say such nonsense in front of her again, do you think I won't throw you out? The tall man said calmly, "Don't forget who took you in. We're just staying here temporarily." Someone said unhappily, "Then you're going out now." The person who spoke immediately fell silent. They did not come in to avoid the meteorites, but were chased in by the wolves summoned by Ko Hua. They did not expect to survive. Old Granny Augis was usually regarded as an enemy by them because of her devout belief in the Holy Cathedral. But when they were first let in to take refuge, this old woman in her 80s, who had long been blind, did not say anything unnecessary. She only asked her grandson to open the cellar door. Everyone knew that this old woman's son had also died in the war in the south not long ago, and she and her grandson depended on each other. The owner of the seafood store pitied them and let them stay in the cellar for free. And being at the bottom of society in this era, it was impossible for them to be picky about their living conditions. The little boy was the last to climb down. Looking at so many people in the cellar with his mouth closed, he seemed a little shy. He silently walked to his grandmother's side. The latter smiled and patted him on the back. "Go get everyone some water. There's not much water left, old Granny Augis. The river outside is almost dry." The tall man frowned. "We have to drink water. There's always a way." Go, everyone's mouths are dry. The old woman's pair of turbid eyes stared straight at the air in front of her as if there was something there. Her wrinkled face smiled slightly as she replied. The tall man did not say anything. He was old Heathcliff's apprentice, and the girl with the thick eyebrows was the daughter of the owner of the seafood store. The two of them actually had nothing to do with the old granny. The water was stored in a dried mud vat, and it was only a third full. The little boy stood on his tiptoes and scooped up a ladle for each of them. The tall man saw that the boy was struggling and walked over to take the wooden ladle. He poured half of the water in the ladle and handed it to the secret society clergyman. The latter glared at him but did not dare to do anything. He silently took the ladle and drank. Everyone was silent as they drank the water in silence. When Hippamra opened her eyes, this was the scene she saw. You're awake. The girl with the thick eyebrows kept staring at Hippamra. In fact, it was hard not to notice such a delicate person. She had a head of beautiful golden curly hair, skin as white as porcelain, lips as red as cherries, and a sharp nose dotted with faint freckles. She was playful and cute. She saw Hippamra blink her eyes and open them slightly. Her eyes were drowsy, and her long eyelashes were as thick and neat as brushes. She could not help but marvel at Hippamra's beauty. Heavens, how can there be such a beautiful person? She must be the daughter of one of the nobles in the inner city. The girl with the thick eyebrows thought to herself. What is this place? Hippamra was in a daze and asked weakly. Fortunately, she at least remembered what happened before she fainted. She was injured while escaping from the pursuit of the Dragon Queen Gwendolen, but she did not know why she had suddenly abandoned her. Chapter 1106. An old voice came from the darkness. This is old Mr. Hippy's seafood store. You were injured, it was my grandson who found you. The one who answered was old Mrs. Otis. Although she couldn't see, her ears were extremely sharp. She turned her head and kindly comforted Hippamra. You don't have to worry, little girl. You can stay here at ease. Your family will definitely come to find you soon. Anyone could see that Hippamra's clothes and appearance were like that of a noble family's daughter. After Hippamra heard this answer, she stared blankly for a long time before finally finding the main point of this question. She asked, May I ask where this seafood store is? The girl with thick eyebrows raised slightly, as if she finally found a chance to interject. She hurriedly replied, The seafood store is a place where seafood is sold. My father manages the seafood trade in the entire city of Rushta. The seafood on the table of every noble in this city is sent out from here. After saying that, she added with some pride, Maybe the seafood you ate at home is a product of my family. Seafood? Poor Hippamra, this pious priestess Himalad who was born in the mountains, was hearing this trendy term for the first time. The girl with thick eyebrows thought to herself that this was really a young lady who didn't do physical work and couldn't distinguish between grains and vegetables. But strangely, she didn't feel disgusted at all in her heart and even had a bit of a good impression. She replied, It's fish, shrimp, crabs, and other seafood. Hippamra immediately sobered up and asked with wide eyes, You actually eat shrimp and crabs? Of course, the blue lobsters of Cloak Bay and the sea crabs of Fishta are all top-quality seafood. The girl with thick eyebrows carefully explained. But Hippamra didn't seem to hear and muttered to herself, You actually eat shrimp and crabs? How terrible, they are friends of humans, what? The daughter of the seafood store owner was stunned. Hippamra looked at the box the little boy was holding in the water with some sadness. She had already seen a lot of friends of humans inside. The young girl's heart was grieved to the point of speechlessness. The girl with the thick eyebrows was at a loss for a moment. She didn't know why, but when she saw Hippamra's depressed face, she felt very sad. She quickly comforted her, It's not a big deal if you don't like to eat lobsters and crabs. Cod and sardines are also very good. I'm fine. You don't have to comfort me. Thank you. Hippamra heard the comforting tone in the latter's voice and replied softly, also, it's prawns. Not just prawns, they are all friends of humans. The girl with the thick eyebrows was stunned again. For a moment, she was speechless. No matter how hard she racked her brain, she couldn't figure out why shrimp and crab were friends with humans. At this time, Hippamra sat up on the bed. She lifted the quilt and cast a healing spell on herself. A ball of light appeared in her hand and merged into her body, healing the wounds on her body. The cellar suddenly fell silent. You are a priest. The girl with the thick eyebrows felt that her brain was about to overload. She never dreamed that they would pick up a priest from the holy cathedral. In the eyes of the commoners, a high-grade believer who could cast holy spells had a status higher than that of the aristocrats. Hippamra looked puzzled at the group of people in the cellar who were staring at her, and replied doubtfully, "Yes, I am a priest of Lady Himmelud." The cellar was silent for a moment. "Martha bless you, lady, you are a priest." I didn't see wrong, did I? Lady, you just cast a profound holy spell, right? Lady, you must save us. It seemed that in an instant, the crowd burst into a clamor. Hippamra was startled and quickly replied a little bewildered, "You are mistaken. That is not a profound holy spell. It is just a healing spell. It is just a second circle spell. It is just a healing spell." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Perhaps in the eyes of others, there were hundreds of people in the empire who were in the supreme realm and elemental level, thousands of people above the gold rank, and countless people above the silver rank and black iron rank. They could not help but have an illusion that there was no existence below the black iron rank in the empire, and that even the commoners were at least at the level of white rank or above. But in fact, this was a misunderstanding. The huge number of strong people in the empire was based on its equally huge territory and population base. In fact, in terms of the number of geniuses in 100 people, the empire and Fanzan were far less than the Wind Elves, and were not much higher than Erewhon. And for the Holy Cathedral, there were many existences above the black iron and silver rank, but they were often an important part of the soldier monks and the army of the church. Those above the gold rank were at least high-grade priests in a region, and when they reached the elemental level, they would at least hold the position of bishop. For the commoners, the most they saw was a priest in charge of a church or a regional holy cathedral. In fact, the strength of the priests was at most at the silver rank. As for the commoners, they ranged from the white rank to the black iron rank. Therefore, to them, priests were already high-ranking members of the clergy. However, these people's magic power was limited. If they could use substitutes, they would rarely perform miracles. Therefore, their knowledge of pharmaceutics might sometimes far exceed their knowledge of religious studies. As for a mere healing spell, it was even more impossible to talk about. So because of this sentence, Hippamra's position in the hearts of the commoners suddenly rose a lot, not to mention that her appearance was a plus point. In the eyes of the 7 or 8 commoners in the cellar, this goddess-like young lady was already the savior in their hearts. "Sir, please take us away from here." "That's right, my lord. You must save your believers." The commoners all started to discuss, but the big guy at the side couldn't help but snort. A moment ago, these people were still the faithful followers of the secret society, and now they were the most devout children of Lady Martha. It was not difficult for them to change their beliefs at all. Even the young secret society clergy in the black robes silently shrank back, not saying a word. What a joke, he was just an ordinary priest. If Lady Martha found out that he was a heretic, she would send a bolt of God's lightning down and turn him into ashes. Of course, the spell God's lightning was just a figment of his imagination. So far, he had not officially started to learn black magic. The bishop taught him a spell. It was said that as long as he meditated on this spell, he would be able to hear the call of the Lord. But he had not succeeded even once. Hippamra was confused and quickly said, "Everyone, please be quiet. What's going on?" Only then did the crowd scramble to explain the current situation in detail. They knew in their hearts that they did not know what was going on outside, but it did not seem to be anything good. Although they could hide in this cellar for a while, it was not a long-term solution. Not to mention the long term, there was not enough water and food for 7 or 8 people. At most 2 days, if the chaos outside did not end, their situation would become very bad. Although these people were fanatical when they participated in the riot, they were sober after the meteorite fell. They understood that at this time, the safest place for them was the place controlled by the Holy Cathedral of Fire. And this noble young lady in front of them was undoubtedly the most suitable person to lead them. Due to the messy conversation, it took Miss Priestess a while to understand what was going on. But contrary to everyone's expectations, she didn't make a judgment right away. Instead, she furrowed her thin eyebrows and said, "What's going on? It sounds like it's descending, Miss Priest, what did you say?" The crowd obviously did not understand. Hippamra shook her head. "If what you said is true, the current situation is indeed quite dangerous. But I'm going to find the Lord." "Where do you plan to go?" "My lady," someone quickly said, "we don't have to follow you, but can you take us to the nearest holy cathedral? There is a priest there, he will definitely be able to protect us." "That should be fine," Hippamla replied after some thought. She didn't know the way, so it was a good idea to ask someone for directions. "Although I'm the priestess of Himalud, everyone is bathed in order, so I think it should be fine." She asked again, "Where is the nearest holy cathedral?" "I know." At this time, the big man who had not spoken until now replied, "Miss Priest, I will lead the way for you." "That's good, but let's agree that I am only responsible for sending you to the holy cathedral. I still have to find the Lord," Hippamra said carefully. The crowd quickly nodded and agreed in unison. In fact, they were collecting food with the intention of going to the nearest holy cathedral to seek protection. Now that there was a high-ranking priest who was willing to protect them all the way, this was undoubtedly the most exciting news. The old grandmother was also happy. She originally planned to stay alone, but under the persuasion of the crowd, she decided to go with them. After all, there was nothing to be dissatisfied about not being separated from her grandson. Besides, everyone knew in their hearts that staying here was just waiting for death. The old woman did not want to be a burden to them. Of course, under normal circumstances, it was indeed difficult for them to bring an old woman with limited mobility. But now that Hippamra was in the team, it was another matter. The little boy still did not know what was going on, and he did not know that he was almost separated from his grandmother. After receiving the ladder's instructions, he climbed up the ladder and opened the stone cellar door above the cellar. The originally lifeless atmosphere in the cellar could not help but become a little lively. Everyone started to pack up their things, packing up water and food, and bringing them with them. In this period of time, to the commoners, these were the most precious treasures. After all, no one knew what was going on outside and how long the turmoil would last. Although Hippamra wanted to look for Brando, she was not in a hurry. Instead, she looked at the actions of these people curiously. In the era she lived in, the Earth Holy Cathedral was still active in Wound. That was before the era of the War of the Holy Saints and had a history of at least 1,000 or 2,000 years. Moreover, she was the saint of the Earth Holy Cathedral and did not know much about these low-level things. She could not help but be filled with interest upon seeing this. However, before everyone was ready, the grandson of old grandmother Augis jumped down from the ladder and said softly, "There are people outside." The cellar instantly fell silent. The big man asked, "How many people?" The little boy threw a glance at the secret society's priests who were standing in a dark corner behind them and said, 7 or 8 people like him. It's the secret society's disciples. Everyone suddenly became nervous. Although they were still the most fanatical believers less than an hour ago, their minds were now clear, and their survival instinct took over again. Who knew if these secret society's disciples would have a conflict with the priestess? This was their only hope. These commoners could not tell the difference between the priestess of the Holy Cathedral of Fire and the priestess of Himmelot, but they did not think that she would have a good relationship with the secret society's disciples. It had to be said that although the commoners living at the bottom did not have much knowledge, they had simple values and political views. After they analyzed the pros and cons, they immediately said to the little boy, "Quickly go and close the cellar door again. It's too late." The little boy shook his head vigorously. "When I came down just now, they already saw me." "Sigh, how can you be so careless?" Everyone suddenly felt distressed. Looking at their expressions, Hippamra could not help but feel a little worried. She was not as heartless as the Roman, nor was she as clear as Brando about the hierarchy of power in this world. Besides, there was a horseshoe beetle, a dragon queen, and so many supreme class masters in the city that could threaten her. She did not know who these secret society's disciples were, and for a moment, she was a little nervous. While she was worrying, a series of messy footsteps came from above the cellar. Everyone suddenly fell silent, only the eyes of the young secret society's disciple were a little bright. Of course, at this time, he did not dare to say a word. Although his fellow disciples were above, the priestess was still in front of him. It would only be a matter of minutes before she turned him into ashes. At this time, he was still thinking about the priestess's thunder. The atmosphere in the cellar could not help but be a little strange for a moment. Everyone had different thoughts in their minds. The footsteps above were getting closer and closer. They chaotically crossed the open stone door of the cellar and went in another direction without stopping. Everyone was stunned. The joyful expression that just showed was also frozen on the young secret society's disciple's face. For a moment, he did not know how to close his mouth again. His face almost twitched, looking very strange. Fortunately, no one noticed this. Hippamra looked at them and asked, "What do we do now?" "Let's wait." Someone said. "Let's wait." The others quickly responded. No one dared to take the risk at this time. Chapter 11:07. Her emerald green eyes reflected a thin golden trajectory as it fell into the horizon. A wind blew in the forest, and the shadows of the canopy in the distance surged and the leaves danced. The leaves of the March laurel fell on the balcony and blew into the inner palace. Light flowed into the main hall, illuminating the marble pillars. Eloranta watched all this quietly, while the left and right quietly looked at their great sage. This seemed to be faintly announcing the end of an era, but few people understood what it meant. After a moment of silence, the former suddenly walked down the steps, the hem of her silk robe spreading across the marble floor. She turned around and said to the two popes of Fanzan, "Your Majesties, it is time. The prophecy of the past is now. Perhaps we will be destroyed, or the world will be reborn, but mortals will have the power to decide." The great sage bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesties, please lend me a hand." "This is our duty," the former pope hurriedly replied. "Please rest assured, the empire will always follow the will of Lord Fanzan, great sage." The current pope also added, "The envoy is already on the way, great sage," but he was a little hesitant. "But I am worried about the wind elves. They will agree, they have a 1,000-year-old monarch now." Eloranta smiled gently, as if thinking of an old friend. She turned around and walked out of the balcony, the wind pulling at her robe. There seemed to be an invisible door outside the balcony, and when she walked through the door, her figure gradually faded. Then it gradually disappeared. In many places in the wilderness of the Four Realms and the Starry Forest, the disaster had completely changed the elegant and calm attitude of the natives. A meteorite fell on Quillings, destroying half of the court that the Wind Elves were so proud of. The whole city fell into a hellish situation, and cries and screams resounded through the sky. At the highest point of the Temple of Star and Moon, looking into the darkness in the distance, the city was full of sparks and thick pillars of smoke. The elves all looked at this scene with solemn expressions. But Saint Tassol, the Wind Empress, who was standing in front of the 12-pillared hall, looked calm. 24 knights stood quietly beside her. The hunter siblings, who were dressed in elven attire, followed behind her. Until today, they were still not used to the elven attire, which was considered decent by the elves. The current king of Corona followed behind these people in fear and trepidation. He was unwilling to give up, but there was nothing he could do. He only heard the sage saying to the envoy not far away in a firm tone, "Don't worry about it. The wind elves will ally with Fanzan." "My lord." The envoy's voice was trembling. He had never dreamed that he would actually meet a sage. That was such an honor, the most noble existence in 1,000 years. "I will convey your every word," he replied respectfully. The elven lady nodded. "Go back and tell your emperor to prepare for war. This war may decide the fate of all of us." Her voice drifted away with the wind, as if it had drifted from the forest to a place further away. There were mountains and rivers, plains and lakes. It crossed the straits, crossed the peninsula that broke out into thousands of miles of raging waves, and followed the seasonal wind called verdant, followed the sea currents, and came to a place called Roshar. The wind whistled all year round, rolling up sand and stones through the canyon, carving out countless strange pillars in the sand. In the huge and strange palace on the cliff, the shadow of a dragon danced. In one of the rooms of the thousands of palaces, a young golden dragon was resting his chin on the windowsill, looking at this scene in boredom. "Alas!" The voice of the elder came from outside the door. The little female dragon grabbed a golden cup and threw it out. There was a series of clinking sounds outside the hall. The elder's voice became flustered. "Damn it, you attacked the members of the Senate again. If this goes on, you won't be able to reach adulthood, Alas. It's for you." Alas pouted. Her huge body turned into human form in a burst of golden light. She used her hand to fiddle with her huge curly hair, her golden eyes were full of bored colors. She had been locked up for months. "You dare to bribe a member of the Senate? Don't come again. Then I'll accept it. I just want to tell you that accepting bribes is something even in the dragon race." "Oh my God, you've smashed my beloved golden cup. If I'm not mistaken, this is the collection of Otto II. The voice outside the door made a fuss. An old man with a white beard that dragged on the ground came in with a golden cup. As he walked, he stroked a dent in the golden cup inside. "I have good news for you, Alas. You have to tell me first, what's with the chaos outside?" "I don't know. Maybe Lady Ovanlos is summoning the Dragon Council." The little old man looked around. "Where's Flora? She's angry with me. I gave her earring to a mortal." "Oh." The little old man replied nonchalantly. The relationship between the dragons was very messy. Otherwise, there would not be so many dragon descendants in the mortal world. "You're an adult, Alas." "What did you say?" The little female dragon almost thought that she had heard wrongly. Then she screamed and jumped 3 feet high. She rushed over like a whirlwind and excitedly grabbed the latter's white beard. "What's going on? Say it again." "Oh my God, let go." The little old man shouted in exasperation. He reached out and flicked his hand. Alas flew out like a cannonball and crashed through one of the walls of the palace. She crawled back out of the smoke and dust with difficulty. She looked at the old man with a dusty face and stuck out her tongue. "What's going on, Lord Tulworth?" The Holy Temple suddenly received a promise from Bahamut. From today onwards, the younger generation of the dragons will directly become adults. When you have your coming-of-age ceremony, you can directly feel the ancient will. Allah's golden eyes lit up. The gods are back again. That's not it. This promise is not known if it came from outside the elemental frontier, or if it was left behind before. The priests are already in an uproar and are investigating. The little old man replied. The little female dragon licked her lips. So, there's a war. The latter nodded. Allah's raised her head and looked through the window. The shadow of the dragons was passing over the sky. In the holy temple of the dragons, a majestic voice was echoing repeatedly. Go to cruise. Brando, Freya, where are you? A small, fearful voice suddenly flashed across Gwendolyn's mind. The dragon queen paused and abruptly turned to look behind her, puzzled. There, the entire street was ablaze, with embers darting out from every window and door. Sparks rose and danced amidst the thick smoke. From time to time, the sound of buildings collapsing could be heard. Creaking sounds were heard, but the small voice seemed to be an illusion and never appeared again. She narrowed her eyes, and her pupils reflected the road's surface that was illuminated by the fire. It was as if all the water had evaporated from the soil. The hot air flowed through the streets, and the air seemed to be distorted, forming sparkling ripples. The high temperature did not make Gwendolyn feel uncomfortable. Humans often rumored that dragons lived in volcanoes because dragons flew in the sky and burned everything in their path. Although this theory was full of low-level fallacies in the eyes of scholars, it was not a big deal. Ice and fire, air and earth. It was an extreme elemental environment for mortals, but dragons could draw nutrients from it. That was why humans would often find their traces in extreme environments such as volcanoes and icy peaks, swamps and mountains, leading to such misunderstandings. And for an adult dragon like Gwendolyn, it would not be a big deal even if she were to roll around in magma. Of course, unless their brains were fried, they would not really do that. Dragons also pursued comfort in a good living environment, just like how they pursued wealth. In comparison, their ecology was more similar to the merchants of Moria, greedy, selfish, and greedy for pleasure. A dragon like Gwendolyn was considered an anomaly among the dragons. Just like how their own kind did not understand why they were always running around outside, there was only one reason for dragons to run around: to kidnap a princess of a kingdom and extort the king's treasury. Gwendolyn's gaze carefully searched every corner. She was a meticulous person, or perhaps a meticulous dragon. Years of living had cultivated such meticulousness, but she still found nothing. An illusion. The dragon queen frowned and looked at the square before her. It was the 12-month square. The square was designed and built in the year of the return of radiance. The designer was the dwarven master craftsman Hoseth Steelaxe. Of course, the square had been changed and rebuilt over 1,000 years. Even if the designer himself climbed out of his grave and came here, he might not recognize his masterpiece. Not to mention the square at this moment. Even the street guards from the day before might not recognize it. The ground in the square was blood red, just like the hills and basins that Gwendolyn saw in Billord. The soil was rich in some kind of metal element, and the ground was bright red. However, the ground had cracked under the high temperature, like a dry field. The dragon queen walked slowly on the dried blood scabs, and the sound of cracking bones sounded like she was stepping on broken bones. The statue of Duke Knight Duke had completely collapsed from its pedestal. The stone statue lay in pieces in the middle of the square. His head and left arm were by the fountain, while his torso and lower body were in the middle of the square. The warhorse lay at the bottom of the dry pool, its right hand still holding a long sword, the tip of which was pointed at a charred skeleton not far away. Gwendolyn walked across the square and came to the skeleton. She saw the tree-shaped pendant hanging on the neck of the skeleton, and pulled it off with her hand. At this moment, the skeleton moved slightly. Its upper and lower jaws shook, and the charred vocal cords let out a hoarse and weak voice. "Save me. My lady, save me. Is the ritual a success? It's a success. My lady, save me. Gwendolyn looked back. The blood pattern in the center of the square was in the shape of a whirlpool. The charred corpses were scattered around the center of the whirlpool. She saw a few footprints, leaving towards the northeast. You did well. Save me. My lady. Gwendolyn smiled and put her hand on its head. No. The charred man screamed unwillingly. Why should you be afraid? Death is the best redemption. Why? My lady. The latter trembled in fear. Gwendolyn's golden eyes looked at him with pity. No one will die in vain. The dead need justice. No. You will go to hell too. The voice stopped abruptly. The dragon queen silently threw the bishop's corpse away. Yes, I will go to hell too. Soon, she replied softly. But it was all worth it. She turned back and looked at the dancing sea of fire. It was as if she saw a quiet and confident figure in the flames. That figure looked at her silently through the fire. I'm sorry. We have no other choice. This is the fate of the mortal world. Gwendolyn sighed. The long passage of time had caused life itself to lose its meaning. For beings with eternal life, emotions seemed to have become weak. Only the eternal goal at the end of the long path attracted their attention. She had seen many mortals. The short lives of mortals were like the snap of a finger in her eyes. Their existence and death were but the blink of an eye. She would more or less recall it, but the feeling of sympathy had long since disappeared. But there would always be kindness and innocence that would move the heart. If it was possible, unfortunately, she could not give up all of this for anyone. When she inherited this bloody legacy from the hands of her predecessors, she had already understood this in her heart. She had to be responsible for everyone who had sacrificed themselves for this over the past 10,000 years. Even if they were unwilling, it was not important. If the tree herders could succeed, then everything would be worth it. She left the bishop who was no longer breathing, turned and walked towards the northeast. Soon, she found the corpse of a giant wolf in the sea of fire. It was the son of Fenrir. But the latter's stomach had been cut open, and its internal organs were all over the ground. Half the street was filled with the beast's foul and smelly blood. The dragon queen came to the corpse, squatted down, and reached out her hand to search its stomach for a long time. Then, she retracted her bloody hand. No heart. She nodded in satisfaction. But this action suddenly froze. Brando, Freya, where are you? A somewhat frightened and small voice asked in her heart. Who is it? The dragon queen stood up and looked around with a vigilant gaze. The sea of fire around the square crackled and burned, but no one answered her question. Other than the sound of burning, there was no other sound. But it was at this moment that the voice sounded again. It was ethereal, like the sobbing of a ghost. Brando, Freya, where are you? I'm so scared. Chapter 1108. Roman had a strange dream. The dream was full of corpses and thousands of dead people. The city was burning in a sea of fire, and the buildings were dying. It was like hell. She dreamed that she had become a baby girl, bound in swaddling clothes and abandoned in a square. The buildings in the square were tall and majestic, but they were burned to ashes in the flames. It was not the architectural style of any city she had ever seen. It was neither Bragg's nor Ampere seal. It was even more different from Cruz's aesthetic. Without Brando by her side, Roman began to feel afraid. She wanted to call for Brando, call for Freya, desperately make a sound, but in the end, she could only cry. Her voice was clear and loud. Until someone came out of the fire. It was a group of knights. The style of their armor was strange. She had never seen this style of armor in Brando's territory. When the group of knights saw her, they immediately shouted in surprise. Roman had never heard their language before. They spoke quickly, but she could understand. Found her. Kill her, demon girl. Thank you, Martha, we are saved. The knights shouted and pulled out their swords. However, before they could get close, suddenly a few beams of golden flames fell from the sky and hit the knights. The high-temperature jet passed through their heads and exploded into flames under their armor. Only a few pieces of twisted metal were left scattered on the ground. Then Roman saw some people in black and red robes coming out of the sea of fire. They did not say a word and directly picked her up from the ground. One of them looked at her intently. His face showed an indescribable expression, and he shook his head heavily. He said a sentence. It was different from the language of the knights before, but Roman could still understand it. What a nightmare. He reached out to kill Roman. But the people next to him stopped him. She is at least our most successful work. You can't just destroy her. This is the result of our joint efforts. Perhaps there are other ways. Everything will have to wait for the counselor's joint decision. The man holding the Roman hesitated for a moment, and his hand stopped in midair. This plan has completely failed. We might have no choice but to compromise. No, perhaps we still have a second option. The Druids' plan might not succeed. The Bronze tribe is ruthless and full of flaws. The council will never approve of them. This is not good news, my brother. But the monitors found that Martha was acting strangely. In the past few days, she had used 70 to 80% of the network's energy several times. Although it was very short, there were still traces. What is our great mother doing? Projection. She seems to be projecting something. The man was silent. He put down his hand. I'll test it out with her. The Roman dreamt that she was taken away from that city, and then she dreamt of another, more magnificent city, with many magnificent buildings, sacred halls, and many people in strange clothes whom she had never seen before arguing fiercely in her dream. Then she dreamt that she was locked in a dark place, and then she slept for thousands of years. She sobbed in the darkness, calling out the names of Brando and Freya. She slept in her own dream, and in her dream, she saw Freya, but Freya looked at her in horror and moved further and further away from her. She dreamt that she was in a small room, and the room was a mess. Two unfamiliar corpses fell at her feet. She dreamt of her aunt, who looked at her with a frown. She pointed at her forehead with her fingertips and muttered something. Then she woke up. As she cried, she trembled as she tried to find her way in the darkness. There seemed to be many strange scenes appearing around her. There was a group of cavalry, their bodies emitting fluorescent light, riding skeleton horses. There were also a few swaying skeletons, their eyes flashing with golden red light. There were also shrieking ghosts, emerging from the darkness. She found that she had come to Butchie at some point. On that night of escape, the army of the undead kept coming, but Brando was not by her side this time. Brando, Freya, where are you? She cried out in fear. Standing on the burning street, the Dragon Queen was shocked to see the thick smoke billowing and surging, forming rows of skeleton cavalry with spears in their hands. The riders were wearing tattered armor, and the ribs and spines were exposed between the leaky chain armor below their waists and abdomens. Their skinny hands held spears, and they rode on bony horses. They charged towards her. The ground did not feel the slightest tremor, but the cavalry was already in front of her. The Dragon Queen did not move. Before the skeleton riders and their warhorses crashed into her body, they suddenly collapsed with a loud bang and turned back into choking smoke. The Dragon Queen groaned. In front of her, the burning street returned to its previous state, as if the previous scene was just an illusion. But it was only a moment later. She saw a stag made of flames jumping down from a nearby roof, its hooves on fire as it landed in front of her. The stag was like the one Brando had seen in the dark forest. It was tall and handsome, as if it was a perfect creature. The huge creature looked down at Gwendolyn from above, before turning around and heading back in another direction. The aura of divinity, Gwendolyn was a little shocked. She hesitated for a moment, and then chased in that direction. Countless spirits came out of the flames, screaming as they lunged at her, but each of them screamed and disappeared before they could get close to her. Woman and stag chased each other through the burning city, and every time Gwendolyn felt that she was about to reach the stag, it would suddenly disappear and reappear further away. If it had been anyone else, they would have given up, but Gwendolyn felt something. She held an olive-shaped white gem in her hand, and it was slightly warm in her palm. "Don't worry, baby," the Dragon Queen replied in her heart. "I will be with you, and we will succeed," she muttered to herself. Roman, however, dreamt of a tree. It was tall and lush, and glowed faintly, like the legendary elven tree of the elves, the mother of the elves. Roman felt a little tired. She had grown a little, and now had the body of a 5-year-old girl. She came to the tree, curled up in a hole in the tree, and fell into a deep sleep in her dream. The Dragon Queen suddenly stopped. She saw that the ground in front of her was suddenly torn apart, and countless burning thorns shot out from under the stone slabs, curling towards her. Her expression changed, and she slashed out with her hand, and an invisible wind blade shot out from her fingertips, cutting the burning vines in half. The curled plants fell to the ground, and immediately turned into sparks and disappeared. "That's the golden demonic tree." Gwendolyn finally recognized it. She saw the stag standing behind the burning thorns, looking at her with disdain, and her heart was filled with shock. She probably never dreamed that one day, she would experience the feeling of being attacked by a descendant of Fenlidos. The tree herders planted golden demonic trees all over Wonde, but one day, they were planted right in front of her door. Gwendolyn suddenly recognized the tree. The tree herders gave each of their experimental subjects a different number, and she recognized that the seed of the golden demonic tree was brought to Erwin. "It's it." She finally understood. This was the girl's dream. She suddenly shuddered. The Will of Dusk had recovered so quickly, and just one of its dreams was enough to affect the real world. "I have to find her quickly. I have to be faster." The thorns moved again, and they intertwined to form a wall of whips that rolled towards her. The Dragon Queen let out a strange growl from her throat. If a draconic scholar was here, they would find that it was a sound that had been layered over 1,000 times, and it accurately weaved the 7 lines of law together. A blinding white light shot out from Gwendolyn's mouth, and the burning vines screamed as they melted. But to the golden demonic tree, as long as its body was not harmed, it would not lose its ability to fight. The thorns immediately rose from the ground and surrounded Gwendolyn in a dense cluster, intending to trap her. Gwendolyn immediately flew up, avoiding the annoying entanglement. No one knew the nature of the golden demonic tree better than she did. She looked around in the air, trying to find the main body of the golden demonic tree. However, it was at this moment that a white light shot towards her. It was only then that the Dragon Queen saw what it was. It was a stone worm, a creature that lived in the elemental plane of Earth. It was a mortal enemy of the golden demonic tree, but now these two natural enemies were working together against her. The stone worm was at least 10 times larger than the ones Brando had seen before. Gwendolyn screamed in exasperation, "Mother of stone worm." She was then sent flying. If one were to look down from above, they would be able to see that in a certain area near December Square, after a chain reaction, a row of burning buildings on the street collapsed one after another. Gwendolyn climbed up from the rubble, her face covered in dust. She patted the flames on her hair with her hand, but there was no sign of frustration on her face. Instead, her golden eyes lit up. She bounced up from the ground, and a pair of huge wings spread out behind her back. She flew towards the mother of stone worm in the air, and punched the body of the mother of stone worm. It was as if the previous scene had been repeated, but the two sides had switched places. The mother of stone worm let out a roar, and then flew back like a cannonball, crashing heavily on the ground. In a cloud of dust, it turned into smoke and dispersed. At this moment, Gwendolyn finally found the main body of the golden demonic tree. "Found you, little girl." She grabbed at the air with her divine hand, and the sage's power spread out, pulling the golden demonic tree up from the ground. After losing the nourishment of the dream, the illusion that appeared in the real world immediately shattered into pieces, turning into sparks that filled the sky and dissipated. In the Roman dream, the elven tree seemed to have suddenly withered. She climbed out of the tree hole in a daze, and looked at the scene sadly. Two ice dragons flew out of the thick smoke. "Scram!" Gwendolyn roared, and tore them to pieces with her bare hands. But at this time, the Roman finally arrived at the battlefield of Ampere Seal. The Dragon Queen raised her head and looked at the huge shadow standing in front of her. "Giant God Soldier." She gritted her teeth and said, "All for one, this is what you have done." The huge thing punched at her, and Gwendolyn did not dare to take it head-on. She quickly dodged. She knew that in the Roman dream, the latter dominated everything, and the giant god soldier left a deep impression on them, which meant that the strength of the latter was extremely exaggerated. The giant god soldier punched the ground, and she watched as an area of about 300 square meters was turned into nothingness, and became a crater dozens of meters deep. The full power of a supreme-class attack was nothing more than this. But to the giant god soldier, this was obviously not the full power. It turned around, and then swept its palm at the Dragon Queen. Gwendolyn knew that this could not go on, and she could only use her full power in her dragon form. But if she dragon formed, the holy temple of the dragons might immediately descend on her head. Gwendolyn obviously did not want to fail, so she had to find another way. She flew high into the air and landed on the arm of the giant god warrior, before circling to its back and descending all the way down. The giant god warrior slapped itself heavily on the back, the shockwave almost causing Gwendolyn to vomit blood. As a sage, she should not have been so weak, but the truth was that ever since she was injured in the Battle of the Evergreen Corridor, she had not recovered her full strength. But the shock wave also accelerated her fall, and she carefully avoided the feet of the giant god soldier, and came directly below it. As expected, she saw the merchant lady standing on the street in a daze. The Roman's eyes were closed, and her body was surrounded by black gas. She tilted her head slightly, and looked at Gwendolyn curiously, and suddenly asked, "Did Brando ask you to come find me?" The giant god soldier made of thick smoke above their heads immediately disappeared. Gwendolyn stopped, and looked at the human girl in front of her carefully. Speaking of which, this was not the first time she had seen her. Decades ago, she had seen the Roman as an infant on the final battlefield. Then, near Vargas, she had seen this girl from afar, but the time was not yet right. She took a light breath, as if to calm her agitated heart. "Twilight Dragon, in the end, we still won," Gwendolyn said coldly. "Brando?" the Roman asked softly. She frowned slightly, and showed a pained expression. "Brando." The merchant lady's voice gradually lowered, and then her tone became cold. "Are you the one who awakened me, mortal?" It was as if in front of such a great will, even a noble and powerful creature like a dragon was as insignificant as an insect. "Who are you?" the Roman asked. "The one who defeated you," the Dragon Queen answered quietly. Chapter 11:10. What's this? The little boy turned the thing in his hand over and over again, and then raised it up to take a closer look. It was a white metal cylinder with exquisite patterns engraved on its surface. "This is a knight's shin armor," the armor for his feet. The big man took the object from the boy's hand and placed a high helmet on the latter's head. The latter immediately felt darkness in front of his eyes. He hurriedly tried to lift the heavy helmet, but he accidentally knocked his head on a nearby charred wooden pillar, causing a burst of friendly laughter. The girl with the thick eyebrows couldn't help but roll her eyes at the crowd. She then glared at the big man, causing him to feel guilty. She hurried forward and took off the helmet, and the little boy, who was dizzy and disoriented, regained his sight and found his footing. However, after shaking his head vigorously, he looked at the helmet in the girl's hand with a pitiful expression. Seeing this, the big man couldn't help but laugh. The girl with the thick eyebrows glared at the boy. "Here you go." She then threw the helmet over to him. The latter almost fell to the ground before he caught the helmet. He hugged the helmet like it was a treasure and looked at her cautiously. "He's been a bad boy since he was young." The girl with the thick eyebrows cursed in her heart, causing a burst of cheerful laughter. Hippamra looked at the scene with great interest. Her aloof attitude made her a natural leader among the crowd, but the crowd took it for granted. It was as if a priestess would not be a noble if she didn't act this way. Someone explained to her, "Priestess, Pollock's father is a declining knight. The family's wealth is not enough for him to continue on this path, so he was sent to Rushta to be an apprentice. If he earns enough money in 2 generations, this title can be inherited. After all, he is still a noble." Another person added. Only then did Hippamla understand why the big guy had such prestige among the crowd. She nodded thoughtfully, and in the eyes of the crowd, it was an acknowledgement of their words. For a moment, their attitude couldn't help but become even more respectful. At this time, the big man patted the boy's head and praised, "You're a good knight. When I'm rich, you can be my attendant." The boy seemed to understand, but he still hugged his treasure tightly, causing the crowd to laugh again. However, the girl with thick eyebrows did not look happy. "What's so great about being a lousy knight? You should just be my father's apprentice. When you've finished your studies, my father will naturally let you take care of the business. Yes, when you marry Miss Adega, we'll have to call you Mr. Lepak." The others coaxed. "Bah!" The girl with the thick eyebrows raised, blushing. The big man just smiled and shook his head. Everyone was joking, but their hands were not slow. They each picked up a defensive weapon from the ruins. Even the girl with the thick eyebrows pulled a crossbow from the scorched wall. The bow was a little burnt, but the string was intact. She then dug out a palm-sized dagger from the rubble and pinned it to her waist. The big man also instructed them to find a few sets of cotton-padded armor from the unburned armor rack. For untrained people, this was probably the only armor they could handle, but it was still cumbersome to wear. Fortunately, although the big man's family had declined, he had received a full set of knight education. Although he was not experienced, he was at least well-versed in the theory. He himself put on a chainmail and a breastplate. It took him a lot of effort to instruct the others to help him put them on. He also put on a light helmet, tied a belt around his chin, and pulled out a double-edged sword from the charred barrel. The sword was perfectly quenched, and its surface emitted a faint blue light. The big man very professionally flicked the edge of the blade, and a crisp sound was heard. As expected of the imperial capital. You won't find such a beautiful sword even in the best blacksmith shop in the countryside of Rosik. As he spoke, he carried the sword. He looked like a young knight on foot, or at least a knight's squire. Hippamra tilted her head and looked at the armor. Too thin, too light. That was her evaluation. How could such light armor do the job? The Dragon Knight of the Temple of the Earth weighed at least half a ton when fully armed. Not including the mount, even a knight on foot could only reduce the weight of the armor on the upper half of his body. The armor on the upper half of his body was not much different from that of a dragon knight. In her mind, the assault armor that Rode designed for the subterranean dwellers was the most aesthetically pleasing. Of course, the weight of the armor used for charging and ambushing was naturally lighter than that of the standard armor used by the knights. However, she did not say it out loud. She knew that it was a matter of courtesy. Everyone thought that the high priestess looked down on these things. Of course, she did look down on them. They passed through 2 streets before arriving at this place. They were lucky that they did not meet a single secret society member along the way. Earlier, the wolves seemed to have scattered into the city, so the journey could be considered more daunting than dangerous. However, no one dared to guarantee that they would be so lucky in the future. The big guy happened to know that there was a weapon workshop nearby. Plus, the old man's legs were weak and he needed to rest at any time. That was why he suggested that they come here to take a break and look for some weapons for self-defense. Hippamra felt something when she passed by this area. Planeswalkers and cards of fate could sense each other, so when she heard the big guy's suggestion, she naturally agreed. Their luck was indeed good. When they arrived at the weapon workshop, it was only half burned down. The people in the shop had long run away. After they knocked down the wall to extinguish the fire, they actually found many good things in the shop and under the ruins. Everyone was in high spirits. Activities like dividing the loot were very popular. Although these weapons and armor were now buried under the ruins and abandoned like worn-out shoes, they were still worth a lot of money in normal times. Thus, they wore their helmets crookedly and held all kinds of weapons in their hands. It was a comical sight, but they were in high spirits. Hippamla didn't urge him. She went to the other side of the weapons workshop and muttered a few words. She stretched out her hand and pointed between the bricks. An imperceptible light blue light spread out from her fingertips and disappeared into the ruins. The girl with the thick eyebrows who had followed her all the way here looked at this scene with great admiration. She asked carefully, "What is this, High Priestess?" "My name is Hippamra." "This is a spell," Hippamra answered seriously. "A spell?" the girl with the thick eyebrows murmured. She thought to herself that this was a spell. This was the second time the priest had performed a miracle. He didn't seem to be like the priest of the parish who treasured his own spells. She did not know that the abilities of the priests of the parish were limited, and their work was often heavy. Every holy spell had to be carefully considered before they could be used to ensure that it was used in the right place. Hippamra continued to explain, "This spell can ensure that we can see the hidden magic waves." The girl listened as if she had fallen into a fog. She nodded as if she understood, but in her heart, she thought that the high priestess was very approachable. If it were the priests of the parish, they would not even bother to explain to the commoners. Soon, Hippamra saw circles of ripples seeping out from under the bricks. Some were big, some were small, some were thin, and some were dense. She ignored the others and only reached out to grab one of them. With a crash, something rose from under the ruins. The girl with the thick eyebrows was shocked. She knew that this must be another spell even without Hippamra's explanation. As for what kind of spell it was, she did not need to know. But she saw a pair of silver-white gauntlets rising from under the bricks. The gauntlets were made of light and thin metal. They were stacked on top of each other and strung together. The surface of the gauntlets was coated with a layer of silver-white metal. The surface of the gauntlets was engraved with dense and beautiful patterns. There was a finely carved silver sheep's head on each nail. On each sheep's head, there was a magnificent and fine ruby inlaid. It emitted a soft glow under the firelight. "Ah!" The girl with the thick eyebrows could not help but exclaim. The gauntlet floated towards Hippamra. The high priestess reached out and caught it. She did not care about the gauntlet itself. Instead, she put her finger on the inside of the gauntlet. There was indeed another layer of leather inside the gauntlet. She gently rubbed it, and a golden card slid out from it. Before she had time to look at the face of the card bloomed with a golden light. When she held it in her hand, she found that the card had completely changed. First of all, the gold card had turned into silver. There was a picture of a nun holding a holy grail and chanting loudly. Ghosts surrounded her, but no evil could invade her. The words on the card read, Iron Him Faith IV Light 5, Earth 5, Enchantment, pay XMP and choose X targets to gain immunity 3. Immunity to damage 3 or below, or increase defense by 30%, to maintain, the Iron Him will exist forever. But every time to maintain it to the next level, you will need to pay MP again. Will like iron, heart stronger than gold. Just as Hipamra's index finger touched the slightly cold surface of the card, she heard a voice in her heart. Hipamra. My lord. The high priestess was delighted. She did not even care about the card of fate and calmed herself down. My lord, I'm here. What's wrong? Why can I contact you all of a sudden? Brando's voice was a little puzzled. I understand. Maybe it's because I've just assimilated a card, so my planeswalker ability was automatically strengthened. Hipamra thought for a moment before answering. Assimilated a card. Hipamra focused her mind. The card and the gauntlet appeared in her mind. Brando was in the ruins of the Cat and Beard Inn, but he could not find any useful clues. There was still a trace of Gaia's blood left in the ruins. Other than that, there were also the corpses of the secret society's followers that were scattered everywhere. The angel Aroma was floating in the air. Her body had shrunk to the size of an ordinary person, but she was still serious and unapproachable. She was a demigod. Compared to the golden folk that Brando had seen, she was more sacred but less human. She reminded him of something like Milos, the god of giants, as if she was a pure war machine. At this moment, when Hipamra focused, he suddenly saw what the latter saw. He exclaimed softly. The first thing he noticed was the gauntlet. It could not be helped. It was like a player's instinct. A pale blue frame had subconsciously popped up on his retina. Is this a fake Fist of Tereos? What's the Fist of Tereos, my lord? The Fist of Tereos is part of the armor of Fanzin's strongest knight. In addition to its own attributes, excellent defense, each of the sheep's heads on the nail stores a powerful blessing. There are a total of 8. From left to right, they are the seal of virtue, the sword of benevolence, the shield of praise, the fearless heart, the crown of glory, the place of martyrdom, the words of respect, and the spirit of selflessness. Corresponding to the 8 virtues of the knight, the 8 blessings can raise the strength of the wearer to a level. Hipamra did not care about the light gauntlet at first, but this time, she was shocked. So powerful. Of course, the one in your hand should be a fake made by a dwarf master. Although the workmanship is not inferior to the original, the blessings in the sheep's head can only be used once a day. It is not like the original, which is continuously effective. Brando glanced at the data on the pale blue menu. The attributes of the fake Fist of Tereos were slightly worse than the original, but at least it was the work of a dwarf master. The original inherited the consistent characteristics of the magic equipment in the era of the War of the Holy Saints, which only added a single attribute, giving it 74 points of strength. The fake used the new technology after the first era, giving it 44 points of strength and 15 points of vitality. In fact, it was also enough to reach the threshold of an ancient item. This was a rare fake that was almost the same as the original. My lord, your equipment. Hipamra wanted to say that in the last battle, his equipment was broken into pieces. But Brando shook his head and interrupted her. This thing is more useful to you, but not to me. It is one of the most suitable equipment to work with the will of the mountains. Unfortunately, if it was the original, this thing could make your combat power surpass mine. He shook his head in disbelief. The Fist of Tereos disappeared after the War of the Holy Saints with the death of the Knight Tereos, along with his famous knight's armor, Finality Hub. This thing had not been found by players in the Amber Sword, and according to everyone's guess, this thing should not be found in the new version yet. Brando looked at the card of fate. In comparison, he was not that surprised by this card. Since he became a real planeswalker, he understood that after the War of the Holy Saints, there were almost no real planeswalkers in Wound. However, there were many apprentices like Gerald who had 1 or 2 cards and had the potential to become planeswalkers. Chapter 11:11. According to Hipamra's description, the card was hidden in the glove, which meant that the previous owner of the gauntlet might have been a similar existence. He had a card, and the card might have run through his entire life. At the moment of his death, he kept the card in this pair of equally precious gauntlets. The 2 items were passed down from generation to generation. Because ordinary people could not see the cards of fate, the secret of the gauntlet had never been revealed. Unfortunately, the card was assimilated by Hipamra's Planeswalker's rule as soon as she got her hands on it. Otherwise, he could have guessed the identity of the card's previous owner based on the card's appearance. As the most knowledgeable naturalist in Wound's knowledge in this era, Brando was quite confident. Keep the card. The gauntlet can be used now, Brando said. By the way, where are you? Did you see the Roman? The Roman lady? Hipamra asked curiously. What happened to her? Something happened. She's missing. Brando sighed in disappointment. What? Hipamra was quite surprised and quickly replied, I'm near the 12 Moons Square, my lord. Wait for me there. I'll be right there, Brando said. Okay. Hipamra nodded and left the telepathic link. Like most people, the thick-browed girl beside her could not see the cards of fate in her hand, nor could she hear the conversation between Hipamra and her lord. She only saw Hipamra spacing out for a while before regaining her senses. The latter did not dare to ask anything. Hipamra put on the gauntlets and picked up a ring from the ruins. She did not tell Hipamra that the ring was enchanted with a beautiful defensive spell. However, Hipamra's attention was attracted by the large emerald on the ring. She was overjoyed. When the 2 came out from behind the low wall, they found that the situation outside was quite different from what they had imagined. The relaxed atmosphere among the crowd was gone. With the big guy in the lead, everyone stood in the middle of the road. Even the grandson of old Audrey's grandmother was no exception. Some of them even drew their weapons and confronted the secret society's disciples with stern expressions. On the other hand, the other side seemed to be much more relaxed. About a dozen disciples in black robes sneered as they looked in her direction, as if they were waiting for her to appear. They were not in a hurry to make a move. Seeing Hipamra walk out, one of them immediately shouted, Lord Priest, you're finally here. These guys want to drive us away. What happened? Hipamra asked. Himalad's teachings were peace and tolerance, and she herself did not like to fight. If the other party also came for the weapon, it was not a big deal to give in. Anyway, those things are useless, she thought. Ask this guy. Someone was kicked out of the crowd. The young man in the black robe stumbled forward a few steps, complaining in his heart. He was the one who had secretly left the marks along the way, but he did not expect to be caught red-handed. He also did not expect that his colleagues would ignore his safety and directly block his way. Faced with Hipamla's gaze, he naturally stammered and couldn't say anything, afraid that this Miss Priestess would destroy him with a lightning bolt of divine retribution. At this time, the thunder of retribution had silently completed the version update in his mind. You go to the back and pay attention to your own safety, Hipamra replied. What? The young man was stunned. You won't kill me. Hipamla shook her head and didn't say anything. She wasn't familiar with this era, but she wasn't stupid. These disciples of the Black Flame sect were filled with killing intent. How could they care about leaving someone alive? If they were lucky, they might be able to survive, but that was only a small chance. At this time, the big guy in front suddenly turned his head and said, "I think they are looking for you, my lady." "Looking for me?" The other party quickly answered her question. An old acquaintance walked out from behind the group of disciples. It was the Lord of Corruption, Andesha. She placed her hand behind her neck and gently pushed up her long hair. Her vine-like hair wriggled like worms, causing people to feel nauseous. But no matter what, she was still a charming woman, especially with her voluptuous body and towering breasts. She looked around and licked her lips. "Little girl, we meet again. Where is your lord?" Andesha's eyes were calm, but her heart was filled with vigilance. No one knew Brando's strength better than her. He was still an insignificant little fellow in the loop of trade winds, but her strength was nothing compared to his in just half a year. Even if she used her divine blood to undergo a second baptism. That little prince's blood is really delicious, this thought flashed through her mind. However, this still could not offset the fear in her heart. This was simply too terrifying. If someone had told her that drinking plain water could also increase her strength, she would have definitely pinched that idiot to death to prevent others from treating her as an idiot. But now, she would probably still crush that fool to death. Drinking plain water to increase one's strength, what's the big deal? There were people here who could eat and sleep, and their breathing would become stronger. If Andesha knew about the game, the Amber Sword, she would have screamed in her heart, "GM, someone here is using a cheat." She was vigilant, but she could not go against the Dragon Queen's words. She was also someone she could not afford to offend. Andesha carefully looked at Hippamra, and her mind was spinning. "I must stop these people, I can't let them ruin the Dragon Queen's plan." Frederick, who was summoned in a hurry, is still weak. It would be best if she could capture the little girl and use her to threaten that person. As long as Brando was not close to her, Andesha knew that the little girl in front of her was not her opponent. So she first used words to test her, trying to find clues in it, but she was wrong about one thing. Hippamra stopped talking the moment she saw the woman. At this time, the difference between an ancient priest and a modern priest was obvious. If it were a priest of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, they might have a verbal confrontation, but they would slowly prepare for battle when they could not gain the upper hand. However, Hippamla was the priestess of Himalud. In ancient times, priestesses were trained in such a way. They were warriors first, and then priestesses. The harsh natural environment and the constant need to participate in the war to open up the territory of order required a qualified priestess. Even if Hippamra was a pacifist. But that was a pacifist for thousands of years. There was a big difference between their definitions. Miss Cleric didn't say anything and directly threw out the card that she had just obtained. "Iron him." Two angels with trombones in their hands descended from the sky, and a choir sang hymns in the clouds as they slowly walked down a snow-white cloud path. The holy song descended from mid-air and integrated into the cloth armor, cotton armor, and even ordinary clothes of every citizen present. Then they were surprised to find that the cloth armor on their bodies gradually turned into shining chain armor in a white light, and the cotton armor became thick inlaid leather armor. The big Pollock became a fully armed dragon knight. The armor on his body seemed to weigh at least half a ton, but it was so light that it did not affect the latter's movements at all. This is a miracle. This is a large area blessing holy spell, it's a war prayer. The knowledgeable people had already cried out in surprise, but it was a pity that his knowledge was limited to this. Miss Priest is a war priest. The crowd exclaimed, and even the fear of facing the cultists had lessened. The cultists on the opposite side were even more restless. Looking at Hippamra's actions, who did not know that she was a military priest. A war priest was a high-ranking military priest, and it referred to monks and priests who would fight alongside the army, and not those who would clean up the battlefield, sprinkle water, and pray for the dead. Such priests were becoming rarer and rarer in this era, and people usually referred to them as holy knights. The reason why the Flame Knights of Cruz were so powerful was because they were also military priests. Most people who fought alongside them would feel safer and more at ease, but their enemies would often feel their scalps go numb. These were the elites of the Holy Cathedral. "You're from Fanzin." Andesha finally reacted and shouted in exasperation. In this era, the war priests of the Holy Cathedral of Fire were used to taking the initiative to attack, and only the priests of Fanzin liked to use holy spells first. But she still recognized her wrongly. After all, the glory of the Holy Cathedral of Earth was something that happened before the Holy Spear of Heaven and the mountains and rivers were lost. It was so long ago that it was almost unreachable. Hippamra did not intend to answer any questions. Focusing on self-restraint was the basic requirement of a priestess on the battlefield. The enemies they faced in that era were the powerful dusk species, so how could they be distracted on the battlefield? The priestess was a little curious, and thought to herself, this crazy woman isn't even fighting, so why is she chattering non-stop? If Andesha knew what she was thinking, she would probably vomit blood from anger. Hippamla chanted in a low voice, and several beams of light descended from the dark night sky, landing on top of everyone's heads, illuminating the entire street in a holy white light. Everyone who was within the light immediately felt their strength increase exponentially, and their mental fatigue seemed to have been swept away in an instant. They were so excited that they couldn't help but shout. It was like the sound of a bugle horn on the battlefield. A moment ago, they were just a group of civilians, but now they seemed to have mastered the memory of battle. Their helmets were put on properly, and the long swords in their hands were not crooked. Their ranks were orderly, and they were ready to attack at any time. This was her element, the land of holy light. This polarized defense and blessing element was one of the rarest AoE elements in the whole of the Amber Sword. This element was actually an element that was similar to the element of time. It allowed people to trace back thousands of years of memories, and obtain the experience and skills they wanted from it. At this time, the cultists were no longer facing a ragtag army of commoners, but an army of ancient heroic spirits. If not for Hippamla's ability not being pure enough, these people would have sprouted wings and turned into an army of angels when the extreme planes unfolded. Hippamra used this ability not only to save the lives of these civilians, but also to use the light beam to guide Brando's position. She knew that when she drew the elements from the elemental pool, the Count should have known that there was a battle here. Andesha was stunned. She had seen blessing spells before, but she had never seen a blessing spell of this level. If the bishops of Farnesane were all at this level, then the Kurlutzians and the Wind Elves would not be far from being destroyed. She opened her mouth and tried to urge the cultists around her to hurry up and stop the small fries. But while she was smart, the others were not. Some of them were already cramping up their calves and were ready to retreat. "You guys go and delay the disciples of the Black Flames. They are no match for you. I will deal with Andesha." Hippamra did not waste her breath on the battlefield. She shot out as soon as she finished her sentence. The ruby on her finger glowed slightly, and the power of the selfless spirit manifested. Andesha could feel her body brimming with energy, and her explosive power, reflexes, and insight were all enhanced. She swung her hammer towards Andesha. Andesha's confidence was boosted, and she could feel the power of the selfless spirit surging through her body. Andesha could feel her body brimming with energy, and her explosive power, reflexes, and insight were all enhanced. Andesha was not surprised, but happy instead. After the second corruption, her strength was a level higher than when she was in the loop of trade winds. Now that she was facing Hippamla, her strength was 2 levels higher than hers. She did not expect Andesha to seek her own death. At this point, she could no longer be bothered with those useless disciples of the Black Flames sect. With a wave of her hand, a vine whip shot towards Hippamla, who was in midair. But when the vine wrapped around Mountain's descent, Andesha felt that something was wrong. Her law of corrosion did not have any effect. Of course, Andesha was thinking too much if she wanted to use her law of corrosion to corrode the divine weapon. At this time, the first sheep's head on Hippamra's left little finger glowed. The seal of virtue manifested. Faith in will, perfect spirit, supreme virtue. The ideal of a knight's life, the perfect spirit, manifested in Hippamra's body. This was a flawless will. If Brando's wall of will allowed him to deal with most mortal spells, then Hippamra could ignore some of the more fundamental things. In an instant, all the lines of law around Hippamra, whether it was the lines of law from the Holy Land or the lines of law from Andesha's elemental corrosion, all of them deviated and were no longer under Hippamra's control. Andesha's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Supreme will barrier, nullification of laws. Author's note: I said I would rest for a day, so I'm back. Chapter 11-12. The original seal of virtue of the Fist of Tereos was a continuous buff that could last for several hours, while the fake seal of virtue of the Fist of Tereos was an ability that could store mana. It could only be activated for 7 seconds a day, and did not need to be used all at once. After Hippamra broke through Andesha's erosion whip, she immediately closed the seal. In that instant, the ruby on her right little finger had dimmed quite a bit. She estimated that she only had 2 or 3 seconds left. If she reacted quickly, she could activate it twice, but if she reacted slowly, she would only have 1 use left. This was the second time she landed on the ground. Previously, she had covered a distance of 20 to 30 meters with a single step, and she landed firmly on the stone floor. As long as they were still standing on the ground, the power of Gaia would be continuously transmitted to them. With a slight increase in strength, the power of Gaia would be reflected back to the ground at 10 times the speed. The ground of the street exploded, and the priestess shot towards Andesha like a cannonball. Everyone could only see a shadow flashing past. Andesha could clearly see Hippamra accelerating towards her. Although this speed was nothing to her, she was still wary of the supreme will barrier from before. For a moment, she did not dare to face it head-on, and instead took a small step back. Hippamra saw Andesha taking a step back, and a thought flashed through her mind. Her hands did not stop moving, and she directly smashed the ground with her hammer. Andesha's battle experience was not inferior to Hippamra's by much, and when she saw this action, she understood her intentions. Get out of the way. The ruby on Hippamra's right ring finger flashed, and the sword of Shushan was activated. At this time, she already had the power of Gaia, the Holy Land, and the selfless spirit buff, and with this buff, she had 4 buffs. The mountains will buff her attack and strength up to 75 points, and the sword of Shushan also provided a 30% attack buff, making her 97 points. With the addition of the strength buff, this attack was at the level of Brando before he was in the Cold Dew Manor. The hammer smashed into the ground without any fancy moves, and a visible shockwave spread along the street. Andesha's expression turned ugly. She could easily avoid the shockwave if she flew into the air, but even if she couldn't, it wouldn't affect her much. After all, the shockwave was only close to the level of a meter. She stretched out her right hand, and an arc-shaped green light shield spread out with her right palm as a fulcrum. When the shockwave collided with the light shield, the nearby ground immediately arched up. The impact pushed the soil and stone slabs to pile up in front of the light shield, but the latter did not move at all. It did not show any signs of breaking. The barrier protected Andesha and the disciples behind her, but the situation in other directions was not as optimistic for the Patriarch. The former could ignore attacks that were close to the Lamita realm, but that did not mean that others could do the same. The shockwave swept past the feet of the disciples of the Black Flames and they were immediately sent flying. One after another, they fell into the nearby ruins. The lucky ones only suffered broken bones while the unlucky ones were pierced by broken wooden stakes. Some of the unlucky ones even fell into the fire and immediately let out terrifying screams. Andesha's face was as black as iron. She did not care about the lives of these people, but she regretted her decision. She did not expect that this little girl would be so cunning. At this time, the spectators in the distance were excited. Under the lead of the big guy, they charged forward. The disciples of the Black Flames were already in a mess from the previous wave of attacks, and this time, they were completely defeated. "You will regret this." Andesha screamed in anger. She was about to go crazy. She did not put Hipamra in her eyes, and her target was Brando, who was behind her. She did not expect that she would suffer such a huge loss because of her carelessness. As if to prove her anger, accompanied by her scream, there was a sudden loud bang on the street. Something rolled up the soil from the ground and stretched out. That thing was so huge and had appeared so suddenly that Hipamla didn't have time to see it clearly. She could already feel a strong wind mixed with the smell of earth rushing towards her. She did not have time to react, but her instincts from the training in the Holy Cathedral allowed her to activate the ruby on her left middle finger. Her defense doubled, and with the 30% defense provided by the iron hide hem, the surface of her feathers of light glowed with a metallic luster, and a faintly discernible illusory shield appeared in front of her. But all of this was useless. The huge object slammed heavily into the illusory shield, and the invisible shield immediately shattered into pieces. The unstoppable force continued forward and landed on her body. Hipamla was immediately sent flying, crashing heavily into the burning ruins behind her. "Miss Priestess! Miss Priestess!" Everyone could not help but cry out. Hipamla crawled out from under the rubble with much difficulty. Her snow-white face was bruised in several places, and blood flowed from her nose and mouth. She looked at the thing that had risen from the ground and realized that it could not be described with words. It looked like a tentacle, but its shape was constantly changing. What was even more surprising was that it was impossible to remember what it looked like just a moment ago. On the surface of the tentacle, there were many human faces. Some were frightened, some were in pain, some were sad, and some were in despair. The only thing they had in common was that they did not have eyes. Their empty eye sockets were pitch black, as if they wanted to suck people's minds into them. This was definitely not something that should be in the material world. Hipamra could feel the evil and despair from the tentacle. The tentacle was 20 to 30 meters long, but she knew that its body was even bigger. This was not something she could deal with. "Run!" She immediately shouted to the others. Everyone did not react in time. At this time, the tentacle pressed down on Hipamra again. Hipamra's right hand flashed and activated the glorious crown, martyr's stand, and words of modesty. She raised the will of the mountains and rivers in her hand. Bang! The tentacle pressed down on the cross warhammer. Hipamra felt her feet sinking, but she managed to block the attack. The glorious crown increased all skills by 5 levels for 15 minutes. Martyr's ground increased all attributes by 30% for 20 seconds. Words of reverence increased all attributes by 10% for 20 seconds. Words of reverence increased all attributes by 10% for 20 seconds. Andesha almost thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her. There was actually a mortal who could block Frederick's attack. "Miss Priestess, do your best." Everyone's hearts that had just been raised calmed down again. They could not help but cheer. The young disciple next to the crowd stopped himself from shouting. He couldn't help but sweat profusely as he wondered what was wrong with him. But Hipamra knew that this was not a long-term plan. Not to mention the short duration of the 8 holy seals, she felt that the monster did not use his full strength. It was as if he was toying with his prey. This was an evil god. As the priestess of Himalud, she was a believer of Gaia just like the tree herders. She was no stranger to these twisted creatures. She could even feel which Frederick was the evil god. The evil god Frederick, the most brutal lord of the ice plains. I have to get everyone out of here. A sense of responsibility welled up in the priestess' heart. This was the compassion and generosity inherent in the daughters of Gaia, the maidens of the mountains. The tentacle swept towards her again. This time, Andesha also made a move. She was determined to get rid of this threat before Brando arrived. Otherwise, the combination of the young man and the little girl would be too terrifying. Pamela, on the other hand, revealed a card. Holy Song of Protection. A white light bloomed between Andesha and the tentacle's attack. This card was converted from Enrolda's holy ring. It made people immune to all damage, so Hipamra was not injured. Instead, she used the force to fly far away and landed beside everyone. As soon as she stood up, she immediately shouted to the girl with thick eyebrows not far away, "Take everyone away." After her previous observation, she already knew that the most authoritative person was the big guy. But for the big guy, Miss Adagia's words were the most important. Although the girl with thick eyebrows had only been with Hipamra for less than an hour, she believed the latter's words very much. She quickly said to the big guy, "Listen to the priestess' words." At this time, there was no need for her to remind them. The others had already seen that the priestess was not a match for the terrifying monster. Of course, they did not blame Hipamra for not doing enough. After all, everyone could see how terrifying the tentacle was. Most ordinary people did not know that the strength of a monster was not directly related to its size, and this was even more true for the evil gods. As soon as Hipamela opened her mouth, they immediately scrambled to escape. The big guy wanted to pull the girl with the thick eyebrows, but the latter slapped his hand away. "Go help grandmother," the latter said loudly. She then helped the injured Hipamra up and prepared to chase after the others. The grandson of Aji's grandmother followed beside them, but he was not afraid at all. The girl with thick eyebrows could not help but pat his head. "Good," she said, "you will be a great hero in the future." The little boy immediately puffed out his chest. Everyone fled along the streets. Andesha was not worried when she saw this scene. She only laughed disdainfully. If the great lord of the frozen plains, Frederick, allowed a group of ordinary people to escape from him, it would be too laughable. As expected, in just a few moments, dozens of tentacles shot out from the ground from both sides of the street. These tentacles were separated by dozens of meters, and no one knew how big the evil god's main body was. As soon as the tentacle appeared, it immediately swept towards the crowd. It could have easily caught up with everyone, but it calmly started to attack the slowest person. The latter screamed as he was rolled up, and then it crushed him, turning him into a rain of blood. A thick sense of despair enveloped everyone's heads. At this time, even the stupidest person could see that the other party was simply toying with them. Hipamra also seemed to have seen through this. She stopped and pushed the girl with thick eyebrows aside. "You guys go first, I'll bring up the rear." "Lord Priestess." The girl with thick eyebrows was stunned. She looked at Hipamra in a daze, unable to say a word. The others who ran far away also stopped. They looked back and shouted, "Adagia, Lord Priestess, what are you doing? Hurry up." "Lord Priestess, she said." The girl with thick eyebrows stuttered. "I'll bring up the rear. You guys run, or none of us will be able to escape." Hipamra repeated to everyone. Everyone was stunned. The priestesses of the Holy Cathedral of Fire would never say such a thing. Their duty was to maintain order. Although the protection of civilized society and ordinary people was required by the doctrine of the Path of the Golden Flames, it did not include self-sacrifice. In this era, in many parts of Wonde, the religion's definition of protection was derived from this. It was illogical for the priestesses of civilized society, especially the high-ranking ones, to sacrifice themselves to protect ordinary people. Civilization had taken root in this troubled land with so much difficulty. In the eyes of most ordinary people, every outstanding individual should be protected so that they could play a greater role in the world of order, and not die for some insignificant people. The priestess was so outstanding, and she looked so young. She should be a genius in any holy cathedral. How could they let a genius die for them? Such selfishness would make even the most despicable person feel ashamed. Everyone subconsciously stopped in their tracks and said loudly, "Lord Priestess, we'll go with you." "You guys go." Hippamra smiled. The scene in front of her reminded her of the past in the holy cathedral of Earth. Every mother's child was glorious and proud before they lost this glory. "I'm the priestess of Himmelud. Mother's daughter." The girl with thick eyebrows opened her mouth. "My lord, we can't let you die for us." "I won't die." Hippamra was certain as if she was stating a truth. "My lord will come to protect me." "My lord." The tentacles had already crushed 2 rows of houses on both sides of the street and came behind them. The girl with thick eyebrows looked over there with extreme fear. The big man behind her was so anxious that he wanted to rush over and carry her and run, but he knew that he could not do so at this time. Hippamla then looked at the black-robed young man, who had followed them all the way here in a muddle-headed state. "You should run with everyone," she said. "I'm a disciple of the Black Flames." The young man replied in shock. "My lord. It doesn't care who you are." Hippamra pointed at the approaching tentacles. "No." The young man's head was full of sweat, and his long curly hair was stuck to his forehead. He refuted loudly. I'm a disciple of the Black Flames." "My lord, don't you care?" Chapter 11:13. You are a disciple of the Black Flames. Hippamra smiled. "Do you know the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames?" The young man was stunned. Pandora's box was opened. Wars and plagues, monsters and disasters came one after another. This was the origin of the so-called calamity of civilization. That was the most glorious era of the Temple of the Earth. The daughters of Gaia and the Myrnas protected this world of civilization and order. In that era, Hippamra knew that there was a group of people who had lost their families and loved ones because of the invasion of monsters. They swore revenge and used the Black Flames as a mark to be enemies with the monsters for the rest of their lives. They were called the 3 Swords of Civilization along with the Temple and the Legion. But as time passed, the swords had decayed. She gave the big guy a look and the latter immediately rushed up to pull the girl with the thick eyebrows and ran. Everyone finally began to turn around. The young man in the black robe was stunned for a while before he followed hesitantly. He thought for a while before he tore off the brooch that represented the secret meeting from his robe and threw it into the ruins at the side. Behind everyone, a dozen tentacles finally caught up with Hippamra and pressed down on her together. "Miss Priestess." The girl with the thick eyebrows could not help but scream. Hippamra's figure disappeared. Frederick's tentacles surrounded the priestess in the center. They intertwined with each other and there were thousands of faces on them. These faces changed their expressions and let out lingering whispers, like a low sigh in the ear, whispering and not stopping. Hippamra felt a voice squeeze into her mind. That voice was like hundreds of voices overlapping. They repeated different intonations and different contents. It was buzzing and noisy, but it made her understand the content. "They have betrayed you. The Temple of the Earth no longer exists. I recognize you, little girl. You are the priestess of the Temple of the Earth. You do not belong to this era." Hippamra pursed her lips and frowned as she stared at the big guy. She was still a little afraid in her heart, but she was the shepherdess of Himmelud. She had to stand here and watch over the flock of sheep on behalf of the goddess. She took a deep breath and her chest heaved up and down. I know you too, Fredridge, and I cannot be deceived by your sweet words, she cried. A low chuckle squeezed into her mind. He. But I found something interesting in the way these people think. Do you want to see it? What a pity. The once glorious holy cathedral has now become a vassal of the barbarians. Do you know how the Earth Holy Hall was destroyed? The cacophony of voices was incoherent and annoying. With thousands of tones overlapping together, it was as if there were thousands of people chattering in one's head. Those mortals don't understand at all. How arrogant are you? They only know how to seek personal gain. They killed your companions and betrayed your faith. You don't fit in with this world. Hippamra was silent. The last sentence pierced her heart. The young girl's eyes sparkled. She opened her mouth slightly, but her heart was filled with softness. She understood that she was indeed incompatible with this world. This was not an era that belonged to her. Hippamelud was the king of the mountains. Her arrogance made her throne carved at the peak of the mountains, under the howling cold wind all year round. Her priestesses were equally arrogant. Every shepherdess was the most outstanding and beautiful young girl among their peers. Their hearts were pure and flawless, their wills were firm, and their status was incomparably respected. This arrogance was innate, as if they were naturally above the mortals. They protected the mortals like a flock of sheep guarding the goddess. Because the sheep were weak and needed their protection. They were strong, so they could show mercy. But that era was over in the end. From the moment she was summoned to this world, she understood this principle. This was an era of mortals. Hippamra silently put away the arrogance in her heart. She was a smart girl and knew how to protect herself. She learned to smile politely, as if she was gentle and approachable, like the girl next door. She looked at this world without saying a word. Because she understood that she was incompatible with this world, she only evaluated this era in her heart. Backward production techniques, old weapons, weak strength, undetermined fighting will. This was the era of mortals. Perhaps it was still warm, but too weak. If the goddess was still here, would it be different? How would such a world fight against the twilight? She felt a little strange. She did not understand why Lady Martha and the gods would make such an arrangement. But on the other hand, she did not dare to look up the history books about the past. She understood that she was afraid. Because arrogance could not tolerate mistakes. They can't even learn to be reverent. They only have cheap gratitude, but it will soon disappear and they will forget you completely. Only worship and reverence can be maintained for a long time. Go and kill them, Frederick's voice guided her patiently. But the last ruby on the sheep's head nail lit up automatically. A knight's fearless heart came from a fearless spirit. It eliminated all fear and confusion, and was immune to all interference from the mind and will. It blocked the soul and cleared the mind. Hippamra suddenly woke up. The confusion in her eyes disappeared, and her gaze became more determined. Arrogance will eventually lead to destruction. Nothing lasts forever. The glory of the Temple of the Earth is just a part of history. Its survival is just a moment to the world itself. She opened her mouth and answered. Ha ha ha. Listen to this arrogant tone, look at this high and mighty priestess, commenting on the progress of history with the eyes of mortals. How arrogant. It seems that you still don't want to give up your position in the past. Frederick's sharp and thin voice retorted. It was like the shrill noise of a file. Hippamra looked up at the intertwining tentacles and replied loudly, Frederick, you can't confuse me. My personality is not my weakness. I've never been ashamed of it, because the pride in my heart is not the source of my blindness. And because I've seen many people better than me, Frederick. Even in this era, it's the same. Frederick fell silent. After a long while, he said sullenly, Oh. There's actually someone who can make a priestess of Himmelud say such a thing. How puzzling. You're lying, little girl. Disappointing, detestable. The era of the ancestors is over, leaving behind a disgusting world. Hippamra smiled and said with admiration, that's because you haven't seen him. He can be an enemy of an empire for a promise. He's not strong, but he's brave and strong-willed, humble and clean. He doesn't have any of the bad habits of the nobles. He's neither frivolous nor arrogant. The ideals and beliefs he carries are so pure, as if they came from the sages of ancient times. It's no exaggeration to say that I'm full of reverence for His Excellency, Frederick's voice buzzed as he recalled. In the end, it turned into one. The reverence of a priestess of Himmelud is puzzling. Let me see the little thoughts in your heart. The seeds of deceit will sprout in your mouth. You can't deceive yourself, little girl. Tell me, who is that? Hippamra replied with a smile, my lord. A mortal. The voice was full of disdain. The former sighed softly and looked at the terrifying tentacles in front of him with a strange expression. This is the era of mortals, Frederick. So what? Frederick replied with a thick sense of contempt, you're counting on a mortal to save you. My lord won't save me, Hippamra replied, he's here to kill you. Frederick let out a deafening laugh, and more than a dozen tentacles trembled as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. A mortal, kill him. Brendel sneezed loudly, and he could not help but furrow his brows in confusion. Ever since he entered the gold rank, natural diseases were no longer able to affect him. His body was 100 times stronger than a normal person, and it was an understatement to say that he was like a bull. Could it be that someone was spreading an unnatural plague around here? He knew that Andesha and Myad were in the city. Even though the latter was dead, who knew how many patriarchs there were in the city? Tree herders loved to play with these filthy things the most. Ever since Hippamra's last communication with him, he could no longer connect with her through telepathy. However, he could feel that her elemental pool was weakening, and he guessed that she was in a battle. Who knew if she was a tree herder? Or more likely, she was a tree herder. His gaze swept across both sides of the burning street. At this time, most of the buildings in the South City district had been burned down. Only some embers were left of the 2 rows of houses. The non-burning bricks still maintained their original structure, but without the support of the wooden structure, it was hard to say how long they could stand. Soon, he saw a group of refugees. The group slowed down as they walked. The girl with the thick eyebrows was the first to stop. The others seemed to be infected by her and stopped one after another. No one spoke. This was the best outcome. They were lucky to survive with only 2 or 3 casualties. The Holy Cathedral was right in front of them. As long as they reached there, they would be safe. However, they did not feel the slightest bit of joy in their hearts. The atmosphere was oppressive, and no one knew what to say. Normally, when their lives were in danger, most of the people here would be more than happy to have everyone stand behind them to protect them, as long as they could escape with their lives. However, at this time, they felt as if their feet were filled with lead, and they could not move anymore. The boy did not understand the adult's silence. He kept asking where the priestess was. He wanted to turn back to look at her several times, but he was stopped by the tall man. The tall man did not say a word. He was a knight, but he took off his helmet and threw it far away. The girl with the thick eyebrows held his hand. Her heart was heavy, but she could not blame anyone. What was the use of them staying? Priestess won't die, she muttered. She said that the Lord will come and save her. She was so sure. The Lord? But how can a priestess have a lord? Someone asked. Everyone quickly thought of the reason. She lied to us. She was worried that we would not leave. When this was said, everyone became silent. There were only a few cold-blooded people in this world. Although some people were selfish, it was only because of their survival instinct. Everyone present felt their throats tighten. Something seemed to have appeared in their dry eyes. Some of them blinked their eyes desperately. The young man in the black robe silently followed behind everyone. But for a moment, he felt that he saw something. When he turned back, he saw that there was nothing on the street. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if he had been thinking too much recently and was hallucinating. But his mind was in a mess. He did not know if he was thinking about where to go after leaving the secret meeting, or if he was thinking about the priestess' last words. Do you know the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames? Of course he knew the origin of the disciples of the Black Flames. The bishops used this as the glorious history of the secret meeting. But there were not many believers in the lower class who believed in this. Many people joined the secret organization for various purposes. Most of them were just seeking protection. He was one of them. After hearing so much, perhaps he had accepted his identity. But subconsciously, he still did not believe that the disciples of the Black Flames had such a glorious origin. Are we really fighting to cleanse this world? Asking himself, the young man felt that there was no answer to this question. But he could feel that the priestess did not look at him with any discrimination. She was not filled with disgust like the nobles. He thought about these things and turned around again. But he was shocked to find that everyone in the room had silently taken a step back. It was as if he was suddenly standing in the middle of the crowd. What is going on? The young man was shocked. Then he heard a voice that he did not want to think about even in his dreams. It was as if it came from the deepest part of a nightmare. Excuse me, the priestess you are talking about, is she such a lady? Such a polite way of asking a question was like a noble's, but the other person's tone was not disrespectful or condescending. Instead, it was gentle and approachable. Everyone looked at the young man who suddenly appeared in front of them. He is a count. The big man thought. This person is not Cruz's man. Perhaps he is the lord of the priestess. The girl with the thick eyebrows had such a thought in her mind. Chapter 11:14. Excuse me, everyone. Is the priestess you speak of a lady like this? The young man's expression was solemn. He stretched out his palm with his palm facing down. Everyone saw a cloud of dust gather between his palm and the ground. The glittering dust swirled and formed a picture. It was Hippamela's appearance. Ah, sister priestess. The boy exclaimed in surprise. The young man raised his head and looked at the crowd. My name is Brando, Hippamela's friend. Please tell me, where is she? You are her lord. The young man, Brando, nodded. You will save her, right? The girl with the thick eyebrows asked carefully. In her eyes, although the young man in front of her was wearing tattered clothes, he had an indescribable temperament, just like the palace knights outside Cephas's gate. He was calm and composed, and his manner of speech was extraordinary. Moreover, his skin was white and smooth. He did not look like a commoner. What happened to her? Lady Hippamela was stopped by a monster in order to protect us. The big guy looked at Brando cautiously and answered in a low muffled voice. What kind of monster? Brando asked again, where is it? Yes, sir, a voice came from behind. Everyone looked back in surprise and found that the one who spoke was the young man in the black robe. The latter's head was covered in sweat as if he had just been fished out of the water. He raised his hand and said to Brando, I will take you there. Brando looked at the young man and glanced at the pattern of the black robe. Disciple of the Black Flames. He thought. But he knew that there were many low-level disciples in the disciples of the Black Flames. Most of them were blinded by temptation, so he did not mind and only replied, no need. Tell me, what kind of monster is it? Everyone's heart sank. thinking that this young man still had the mood to ask questions at a time like this. The girl with the thick eyebrows furrowed her brows, and her eyes revealed a look of disdain. She probably thought that he was one of those noble youths who looked elegant on the surface, but was actually a coward who was afraid of death. If she told him how terrifying the monster was, he would definitely find an excuse to avoid it. If it weren't for her grandmother gently holding her hand, the young girl would have been unable to hold back her sarcastic remarks. Brando didn't think too much about it. As a qualified warrior, understanding the enemy was a basic skill. Otherwise, it wouldn't be saving people, but putting himself in danger. He knew that in this city, there were not many monsters that could threaten Pamela, and whether it was the horseshoe beetle or the evil god Frederick or anything else, they could also pose a threat to him, so he had to be careful. Brando understood what they were thinking from the looks of suspicion on their faces. He couldn't help but shake his head, but he didn't explain because there was no need to. He waited for everyone's answer. We didn't see the monster's appearance clearly, but we saw many tentacles that looked like octopus tentacles rising from the ground. The young disciple replied. He was the only one who didn't think that Brando was afraid. He was even a little afraid. Not long ago, this face was his biggest nightmare. Tentacles. What kind of tentacles? Every tentacle was taller than a two-story house. It was as thick as a person hugging it. There were many human faces on it. The young disciple thought for a moment before answering. That's the evil god Frederick. Brando understood. What did he say? Evil god Frederick. A few whispers came from the crowd. The legend of the angel Iroma was widely spread in the Bankdale region. As the other half of this legend, the evil god Frederick was the best way for mothers to scare the naughty children in this area. In other words, almost everyone in this area grew up under the shadow of this great demon king. Frederick would often come in the night to kidnap the naughty children, or take away their candy, new clothes, pillows, and other trivial things. In terms of tiredness, this evil god might even surpass the sanctum to become the busiest person in the capital. And naturally, his name was deeply ingrained in the hearts of the people. They actually summoned an evil god. The young disciple's face turned pale, and he almost fell to the ground. It was clear that he had long suspected this, but he didn't dare to confirm it. Is what he said true? Someone grabbed his collar and asked fiercely. But the girl with the thick eyebrows didn't look at them. She thought to herself, evil god Frederick, what a good excuse. He'll definitely find a way to avoid it. It's not worth it for the priestess to have such a lord. She looked at Brando with disdain. In her eyes, the latter was the most useless of all. Brando saw that the crowd was about to push the young disciple, and he quickly interrupted them. Where is that monster? I mean, where did you and Hipamra get separated? His question startled the girl. She thought that he would leave immediately, but her preconceived disgust made her explain herself. Let's see how long you can pretend. Sir, I know. It's just south of here, less than 3 streets away from here. The disheveled youth hurriedly broke away from the crowd and came to Brendel's front, gasping for breath. That's the east side of the 12th month square. There's a dwarven weapon workshop there, right? Brendel asked. That's the east side of the 12th month square, isn't it? The crowd couldn't help but look at Brando in surprise. They probably didn't expect a foreigner to know so much about Rusta. If it weren't for Big Guy, many of them wouldn't have known that there was a weapon workshop there. Even Big Guy himself knew very little about the owner of the weapon workshop. Yes, the young disciple quickly answered. At the same time, he asked, Sir, do you need me to lead the way? I'm not afraid of danger. Brando looked at him and shook his head. You're not afraid of danger, but I have to be wary of you. You're a disciple of the Black Flames. Besides, I really don't need your help. He pondered for a moment. In the eyes of the crowd, he seemed to be hesitating. The disdain in the girl's eyes became more obvious. Even the young disciple's heart sank. He thought to himself, is this Lord really planning to escape? However, the young disciple slightly agreed. After all, it was the evil god Frederick. Frederick was a real god. Just like them, what could a mortal do if they went there? Brando didn't have the heart to care about what these people thought. He closed his eyes, and his perception of space spread out like water. In an instant, it spread over an area of a few thousand meters. This was the new ability of his elemental mastery after reaching the peak of the elemental laws, space-time control and space-time perception. If there were gold or elemental masters in the nearby streets at this moment, they would see such a strange scene. The lines of law seemed to have come alive as they passed through the streets and alleys. Tracing back to their source, they would find that the dense silver lines had gathered into a huge cocoon of light. Flashing information streams gathered from all directions and summarized into Brando's mind. Unfortunately, the people present were all ordinary people. They couldn't see the spectacular silver lines of law surrounding Brando at this moment. Only the big knight faintly sensed it. He was still looking left and right, suspecting that he was hallucinating. He had learned some knowledge about elemental mastery from his father, but it was too far-fetched. It was said that only his grandfather's father's generation had barely touched the realm of elemental mastery. He had no idea that the young man in front of him was an elemental mastery master. It was obvious. How was this possible? Everyone spent a few long seconds in doubt. During this time, the girl with the thick eyebrows wanted to speak several times, but she was stopped by her grandmother. Grandmother Augie's, this person. She couldn't help but feel a little angry. The old woman only shook her head at the girl. Offending a noble would bring a lot of trouble to the family. She had lived to this age and had seen many of it. She couldn't let this girl be foolish. Besides, it wasn't necessary. Although she felt pity for the approachable Miss Priestess. The girl with the thick eyebrows seemed to respect the old woman, so she could only shut her mouth and sulk. After a few seconds, Brando finally opened his eyes again. Just when everyone thought that this noble young master had considered saying some polite words and retreating, he only raised his head and said to the sky. About 2,700 meters. You can see it too. Everyone looked up. Soon, Frederick's body was exposed under the open air. It was an extremely ugly, twisted mass of flesh, as if countless human bodies were mixed together and formed by intertwining with each other. Fortunately, as soon as this disgusting scene appeared, it was hit by a ball of golden light. Amidst an earth-shattering scream, the ball of flesh completely exploded, turning into blood and minced meat that filled the sky. Then, it fluttered and fell to the ground. It was as if it was raining blood. How dare you sneak attack me, Iroma? Frederick's voice was much weaker than before. It shouted hatefully, follow me, and I will soon have my revenge. Then, the buzzing sound completely disappeared. Thousands of meters away, the people who witnessed this scene were completely stunned. They turned their heads stiffly and looked at the young man. If they had thought that he was just a useless rich second generation before, they couldn't help but start to guess who he was now. And what was that terrifying spell just now? But Brando did not care about them. He pulled out his sword and said to the void, your old opponent is not dead yet. Go after him, I will deal with Endesha. Frederick is a monster born from Gaia's mother's blood. It is very difficult to deal with. As long as it comes into contact with mud and rocks, it is almost immortal. It is normal that it does not die so easily. But the way these people summoned it is not right. It is very weak now, and it is not a match for me in my current state. A slightly cold and neutral voice replied in the void. Chapter 11:15. Frederick is a monster born from the blood of Gaia's mother. As long as it comes into contact with soil and rocks, it will be immortal. It won't die so easily. However, these people summoned it in the wrong way. It's very weak, and it's not my opponent at the moment. A slightly indifferent neutral voice replied in the void. The angel Aroma did not like to talk, but it did not mean that she could not speak. As a high-level creature with extraordinary wisdom, she understood every language in the world, whether the language came from the past, present, or future. This was the ability of comprehension, which only belonged to the gods, and it came from one of the basic laws of Babel Tower. Her voice was cold and slightly neutral, but it was not harsh. Instead, it made people feel comfortable, and they could not help but want to hear her say more. Of course, Brando knew that this was impossible. Since Aroma was summoned, she had only said 3 sentences in total, and this was the 3rd sentence. The first 2 sentences were, "Answering your call, the promised one. Light be with Martha." Brando could understand all the meaning contained in Aroma's simple sentence. Frederick was not so easy to kill, but it was also strengthened a lot under the blessing of the loyalty card. It would not take much effort to deal with the former. He nodded, but still reminded her, "But I have to remind you that the card can only last for 1 stage. There is still half an hour left, which means you have almost only 1 chance. You must make sure to kill it in 1 shot." Aroma nodded. Everyone could not see who Brando was talking to. If it were before, most of them would have thought that he was a lunatic talking to himself, but at this moment, no one dared to think so. Even the girl with the thick eyebrows, who despised Brando the most, could not say anything bad at this moment. After all, the facts were right there. The big guy looked at the sword in Brando's hand in confusion, and he felt that the sword was a little familiar. He frowned, probably trying to associate this familiar sword with a certain identity. He thought that a sword was familiar to him mostly because the owner of the sword was a famous figure, and Brando's performance was enough to prove this point. However, the craftsmen of this era always liked to imitate famous swords, and the knight was also keen to use those fakes of legendary swords as if this was the only way to show off their identity. There were so many famous swords on the market that he could not think of a reason why. After all, he had been away from this circle for a long time. But what he didn't know was that not far behind him, the young follower had also seen the long sword that was made of dark golden metal shards. There were also dark red cracks on the surface of the long sword. The young believer seemed to be scalded and shouted, "Holy sword odorifies." What odorifies? The big knight turned his head subconsciously. At this time, Brando's figure had already disappeared. Everyone heard the scream and turned their heads. Although they were all born and raised in crews, they did not connect the holy sword odorifies with the flaming blade in their minds. But at this time, a faint light suddenly appeared in the sky, and then thousands of rays of light shot down from above the clouds. Everyone had to cover their eyes subconsciously, then squinted their eyes and looked in that direction. They saw countless lightning and flames, and a bright halo behind a pair of wings spread open. Such a scene was too familiar. The archangel was born from fire and lightning. She held a holy sword and slashed the evil god Frederick in the light and sea. This was the bedtime story that countless people grew up listening to. There were countless myths and legends in the pale poem, but only this one was the source of pride in the hearts of the people of the empire. At the same time, it was also the symbol of the empire. The empire's eagle emblem originated from the holy emblem on the shield of the archangel Aroma. That's Aroma. Martha above, Lady Aroma has appeared. Almost subconsciously, the people knelt down. But a few people suddenly realized that the place where Aroma appeared was the direction Brando was looking at before. That's the holy sword odorifies. Finally, someone realized something and could not help but shout. It's the flaming blade. The big knight only felt a buzzing sound in his head. He finally understood why he felt that the sword was so familiar. The sword was so sacred and noble that every knight of the Empire had to make a sacred oath to it. Oh my God, the people could not help but subconsciously connect everything they knew. Finally, the only possibility took root and grew in their hearts, and made them feel helpless. His Majesty, the Flame King is back. The Flame King is back to save us. Amidst the fanatical emotions, the girl with the thick eyebrows only felt that it was unbelievable. Is he really the Flame King? She could not help but mutter to herself, Miss Priestess's Lord is His Majesty the Flame King. She felt a wave of dizziness. Andesha's face was as white as snow. She looked at the scene with a shocked expression. The entire street was turned into ashes by the attack just now. Such power was not something a mortal could control, and the strange phenomenon in the sky proved this point. She felt a chill in her heart. Could it be that this city was protected by aroma as the people of Cruz claimed? Of course, she did not want to believe it, but other than that, there was no other way to explain the scene in front of her. She slightly bent her stiff knuckles and subconsciously retreated into the shadows. Although she was arrogant, she still knew her limits. How could a mortal interfere in a battle between gods? The archangel with the holy sword had descended to this world, and she had to inform the Dragon Queen of the situation here. Brando watched as the woman retreated into the alleyway. He dispelled his refraction spell and descended from the sky, following behind her without a word. He saw Andesha coming to a ruin. She pushed open a charred wooden beam and walked in. She walked through the ruins and quickly arrived at a narrow room. Although the room was already burnt beyond recognition, even the outer walls had collapsed. She nailed a vine to the ground and pulled it up, opening a secret door from the ground. Brando raised his eyebrows when he saw this scene. Ever since Alcra told him that the dark cultists had many secret passages, he had already expected that Andesha would use them. Otherwise, it would be difficult for her to appear and disappear in Rusta's city with her strength. Andesha was not weak, but in the heart of the Empire's power, she could not do as she pleased. After opening the secret door, Andesha carefully looked around. She was mainly worried about the archangel in the sky. Seeing that the archangel did not chase after her, she cautiously let out a sigh of relief and prepared to walk down the secret passage. But at this moment, she felt a slight chill on her neck. Oderfice's gleaming blade had appeared there. The beautiful woman's expression froze. She realized that she did not know how he got close to her. The answer was very simple for Brando. He had the monster leader template and could assimilate the senses of monsters. In the game, the dark cultists were considered as monsters, so this ability was also effective. We meet again, Lady Andesha. He opened his mouth and spoke. Andesha rolled her eyes and was about to say something when she saw the young man in front of her smiling and reaching out to grab her wrist. She was startled and subconsciously wanted to retreat, but she felt as if her hand was clamped by a pair of iron pincers and could not move. What made her even more shocked was that after her lines of law flickered, they completely disappeared. This discovery almost scared her out of her wits. She hurriedly sank her mind into the spiritual world, only to find that she could no longer feel any elemental power. What did you do to me? Andesha screamed in horror. She could not help but panic. Without the power of her element power, her strength had regressed to the level of a gold ranker, or at most, a little stronger. Brando smiled. This was the ability of spacetime control. He had only isolated Andesha from the spacetime around her. This isolation would not last more than a second for existences stronger than him, but for Andesha, it should not be a problem for him to maintain it for a few minutes. It was only after Brendel obtained this ability that he realized how terrifying his elemental essences were. These elemental essences were almost overwhelming to those who were on the same level as him. A few seconds of blank time was enough for him to kill any enemy. The only regret was that he needed to come into contact with the enemy before he could use this ability. However, this was not a particularly harsh requirement for a close combat job. Furthermore, element power was constantly strengthened. Who knew if this ability could be used from a distance in the future? Even though your intelligence is only below average among the 12 patriarchs, you often go back on your words. I have to be wary of you lying to me, which is why I used this method, Lady Endesha. Brando replied, I have only sealed your ability. As for whether you can take it back, that will depend on your attitude. How did you seal my ability? Endesha was terrified. She had completely forgotten how arrogant she was in the loop of trade winds. After losing her ability, she only had a few hundred years more experience than an ordinary person. However, such knowledge was obviously useless in the current situation. She had never heard of anything like what was happening to her body. Brando could hear something from her tone and laughed. It seems like that lady of yours is hiding a lot of things from you. She did not tell you what happened in the White Rose Garden. If I'm not wrong, you should not know about Iroma's descent, nor the reason for the Silver Queen's failure. Iroma's descent has something to do with you. Endesha looked at the young man in front of her with eyes full of fear. Of course I know that the Silver Queen will fail. Her failure is destined. Even the divine people could not do it back then, and she wants to reopen the Truth Symposium to do it. How laughable. But you did not tell her this, didn't you? You even lied to your allies. Brando shook his head. Also, I want to say that you do not know the reason for the Silver Queen's failure. She has already reopened the Truth Symposium. That's impossible, Endesha suddenly stopped talking. Brando could even hear her teeth chattering. You really are the Dark Dragon. You think too much, Lady Endesha. Brando did not know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and replied, but my authority is higher than the Silver Queen's. Gwendolyn obviously knew this, but she did not tell you. It seems like your relationship with her is not closer than the Silver Queen's relationship with her. Perhaps the next one to be sold will be you, won't you? She has no obligation to tell us this in the first place. Then there's no need for you to sacrifice your life for her, is there? No. Endesha frowned and shook her head. If you want to kill me, I won't even bat an eyelid. But I can't ruin this plan. Brando was surprised to see a glimmer of idealism in this vicious woman's eyes. Even though he knew that the Tree Herders was an organization that split from the Ring of the World, and its predecessor was the Ring of Ashes, he thought that these people had already forgotten the pursuit of their predecessors. It was a pity that even if these people had other motives, their actions were still despicable. Brendel's expression turned cold, and the sword in his hand moved closer to Endesha's neck. Plan? What plan? Is it related to the Roman? It is related to that little girl. Endesha looked at him hatefully. But you can't save her. You can't save her. If you save her, everyone will die. Is that so? Then you better tell me everything. Brando threatened coldly. Don't even think of making me say half a word. Very well, I'll give you the count of 3. If you don't tell me, I'll have Iroma sacrifice herself and kill Frederick indiscriminately. I believe that you didn't spend so much effort to summon her to play hide and seek with me. No, you can't do that. Why would Iroma listen to your orders? Of course I can do that. Because I'm a planeswalker. I'm sure you've guessed it. Iroma was summoned by me. Even if she sacrifices herself, I can still revive her. Endesha's eyes were filled with fear, and she almost begged, no, you can't do that. You'll kill everyone, and even if you do that, you won't be able to save your fiancé. You know that she's my fiancé. Brando was unmoved. I'll give you a chance to convince me. Before that, I'll count to 3. 3. 2. Chapter 11:16. I'll speak. Before Brando could finish his countdown, Andesha suddenly gritted her teeth and answered. Brando looked at her quietly, as if he wanted to see through the true thoughts of this woman who was famous for her craftiness, and the lies she was about to tell. You know the consequences of lying to me, and I don't want to repeat myself. If I doubt your words, I will immediately give the order to Iroma. Why you can't be so unreasonable. Andesha revealed her sharp white fangs, glaring at Brando angrily. Of course I can be so unreasonable. Brando impatiently interrupted her. The anxiety in his heart was beyond imagination, and he did not want to waste any more words. From now on, everything will be decided by me. Your answer must satisfy me, and I will decide the standard of my satisfaction. I don't care what you think, I'm just telling you the consequences. Andesha cleverly shut her mouth, and used her eyes to stare at Brando's face. If her eyes were two sharp swords, Brando's eyes would have been a hole. What is Dragon Queen Gwendolyn's plan? Brando asked. Lure the Twilight Dragon to descend, and then kill it. Everything we do is to save this world. It's just that the people of this world don't understand. Any war requires sacrifice. I didn't ask you to finish your sentence. Brando mercilessly interrupted her. You're talking nonsense again. I didn't ask you to explain, and it seems like you don't quite understand. I'm a very impatient person, and I have a very bad temper. Brando raised his head and looked at the sky. Iroma's soul was connected to his, and several golden pillars of light immediately descended from the dark sky, causing the streets to explode. The flashes of the explosions were reflected in the depths of Andesha's eyes, and she finally felt a deep sense of fear. Everyone thought that the tree herders were lunatics, but in her eyes, Brando was a complete lunatic. Moreover, the latter was completely unreasonable, as if he did not care about the life and death of this world. She stared at Brando's dark brown eyes in fear and saw that there was a demon living in them. Her nose was filled with the thick smell of blood from the other party's body, and her lips had lost some color and were even slightly pale. Why would the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn do that? Are you trying to say that she has a hobby of being a savior? This is not her idea alone. She is the leader of the tree herders. This plan is what the tree herders have been working for thousands of years. In the end, the high and mighty woman weakly added, I'm telling the truth. Brando didn't appreciate it. I didn't ask you if it's true or not. I have my own judgment. Are you stalling for time? Andesha immediately shut her mouth and closed her eyes, feeling extremely humiliated. What are the details of this plan? What does it have to do with the Roman? After confirming that Andesha had completely submitted, Brando jumped to the question he was most concerned about. The dusk dragons will is sealed in that little girl's soul. The Dragon Queen hopes to guide the dusk dragon to descend upon her body, and then completely defeat the dusk dragon. Kill the dusk dragon. What does she plan to do? In the past, the dusk dragon had always projected its will into wound. We believe that once it materializes in this world, we will be able to find a chance to truly kill it, and thus completely end the confrontation between the civilization and the dusk. With just you. The dusk dragon is powerful, but there is a limit to the power that its host in this world can withstand. Even if it doesn't care about the host's life and death, its power will not increase to the limit the moment it descends. Moreover, our thousands of years of preparation is not so simple. The tree herders have always been searching for the power in the blood of the gods, not to recreate the gods, but to use some kind of medium. Some kind of medium. A lost bloodline of the gods. It can be absorbed and purified by the gods, allowing the pure-blooded gods to have the same power and authority as their ancestors. In this way, if the dusk dragon wants to completely devour the little girl, it will have to face the highest authority in this world, which is equivalent to becoming the enemy of the order and the law of Tiamat in Wound. Brando understood the tree herder's plan. The Dusk Dragon had always been the enemy of the Order and the law of Tiamat and Woned, but that was when it was at its peak. But according to Endesha, when it descended into this world, there would be a period of weakness, and during that time, the Dragon Queen would find a way to purify the bloodline of the Roman, forcing the Dusk Dragon to wage an all-out war against the Order and the law of Tiamat in its weakened state. That lost bloodline of the gods is the blood of the Dragon of Fury, Alphonse. You spent thousands of years planting trees in Wone just to find it. To find Gaia's blood. Gaia's blood. Brando narrowed his eyes and recalled Iroma's words. Frederick is a monster born from the blood of Gaia's mother. As long as it comes into contact with soil and rocks, it will never die. But these people summoned it the wrong way. It's very weak, and it's not a match for me right now. But he clearly remembered that Frederick came from the twisted consciousness of the Dragon of Fury, Alphonse's blood. Besides, wasn't Gaia's blood also the descendants of the demon tree Fenlidos, the evil god that the tree herders had researched the most? Andesha seemed to have seen through Brando's thoughts and replied, the demon tree Fenlidos has long since perished. We are called tree herders because we want to recreate this bloodline, but unfortunately, we have all failed. The bloodline of the golden tree is too thin, and even calling it a divine messenger is too much. One of the reasons I went to the Loop of Trade Winds a year ago was to find the legendary Valhalla. We have always suspected that the demon tree Fenlidos was originally a world tree. Brando finally understood that the tree herders had always known about Valhalla. But it was not strange when he thought about it. Valhalla was originally a stronghold on the same level as Babel. Andesha looked at Brando hatefully. Unfortunately, you destroyed that opportunity, and we had no choice but to try the backup plan. Although Frederick was created from the blood of Alphonse, it also has a part of Gaia's blood in it. It was born from two types of divine blood. That means you have known about Frederick's existence for a long time, but why did you not act until now? We have always been looking for the legendary baby girl, the pure-blooded one created by the divine folk, the one with the will of the twilight dragon sleeping in her body. She is also your fiancée. You're lying, you found that baby girl 60 years ago. I'm not lying, don't turn around. Andesha hurriedly shouted, her voice full of grievance. The tree herders actually knew about the baby girl's final destination 130 years ago, but it was only 60 years ago that they had the chance to enter the final holy temple. But it was true that the Dragon Queen entered the final holy temple 60 years ago and saw the baby girl, but that was not the best time to bring her out. We had to avoid the attention of the Bugis and the dragons, and those mediocre people would not allow us to carry out such a crazy plan. You also know that this is a crazy plan. But it is effective. Whether it is effective or not is another matter. Let's continue with the previous question. You, Her Majesty, and my grandfather put on a show together and deceived everyone. Even if you spent 10 years, you have waited 60 years, 10 years more than half a century. This is not a period of time that can be passed in the blink of an eye. Compared to our grand plan, 60 years is just a blink of an eye. We have used thousands of years to reach this step, because your entire plan is so long, you can leisurely give up 60 years of it. Of course not, the Dragon Queen has a purpose for this arrangement. Avoiding the eyes of the Bugis and the dragons is only one of them, and the other is the layout in the Empire, preparing for today's perfect ceremony. We still have some people all over the world looking for the whereabouts of the demon tree Fenlidos. Frederick is only a last resort, it is only suitable for today's situation. We have prepared many sets of plans to ensure that nothing goes wrong. But it won't take 60 years. Everything is premeditated. When the Dragon Queen and us first came into contact with the Silver Queen, they were preparing for this day. She deliberately lured the Queen to release the baby girl's seal in order to borrow half of her soul to seal in the baby girl's body. Then we need to wait for her to grow up, and the two souls are completely merged. Although the little girl is not the Silver Queen, her soul and personality are deeply influenced by the queen. So what? Because we need a pure and kind soul to carry the dark side of the baby girl. When she fuses with Frederick's bloodline, she will not be affected by the evil god's slaughter and chaotic desires. The queen is the most suitable candidate, the dragon queen has chosen her from the beginning. Andesha's chest rose and fell slightly. When the disciples of the Black Flames completed the summoning ceremony, the dragon queen sacrificed the last soul, allowing the evil god Frederick to descend on her body. That person is the Silver Queen. The dark side of the queen is now perfectly fused with Frederick, and when it meets the baby girl, the two will have the same soul. So they will fuse. They will not fuse on their own accord, but the dragon queen will urge it to happen. The pure bloodline of the baby girl will allow her to have the absolute initiative during the fusion process, and the pure kindness of the Silver Queen will suppress her dark side. In the process, the little girl will sublimate into an existence like the ancestors, and then fight against the will of the Twilight Dragon who is fighting for control of her body. In the process of materialization, the power of the Twilight Dragon is entrusted to Roman's body, but if it can't get this body in a short period of time, it's equivalent to cutting off the channel between itself and its power. Roman's body is like a cage, trapping it inside. Is this your plan? Andesha looked at him blankly. You guessed it. I'm not a fool. Maybe you like to treat people as fools, but the Silver Queen trusted you, and this is how you repay her. We don't need trust, we only need the plan to be executed perfectly, and there will always be sacrifices. Shut up, Brando coldly interrupted her. If the Silver Queen is willing, then this is a sacrifice. But now I only see deception and use. You have turned her life's work and dreams into a laughable joke. You trample on the dignity and lives of others, and you call yourself saviors. But if we succeed, you will not succeed. Brando replied mercilessly. Andesha's eyes were filled with anger. Brando looked at her with a little pity, but there was no sympathy. The matriarch of the tree herders struggled violently as if she had been greatly insulted, almost breaking free from Brando's hand. The flaming edge of the blade of fire left several bloody marks on her snow-white neck, but she did not seem to feel it. Two dazzling pillars of light fell from the dark sky, and Andesha let out a whimper like an injured beast. Stop! She shouted, I was wrong, stop. How does the Dragon Queen plan to kill the Twilight Dragon? Brando asked coldly. The gods left the final authority in this world, and that is our last hope. As long as the Twilight Dragon is imprisoned in that little girl's body, Gwendolyn will activate that authority and kill the Twilight Dragon's physical body in this world. Andesha shouted loudly. What will happen to the Roman after that? Brando looked at the woman and asked one last question. Andesha opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Seeing this scene, Brando knew that he did not need an answer. He threw Andesha forward, and the latter crashed into the ruins with a bang, letting out a miserable scream. Brando slowly raised the flaming edge and walked through the ruins. Andesha trembled as she climbed up from the broken bricks, the cold tip of the sword already pressed against her forehead. Brando looked at the woman coldly. Where is the Dragon Queen and the Roman? Kill me, the matriarch closed her eyes, trembling as she screamed, kill me, and I won't tell you. I won't kill you, but I will kill Frederick. Brando replied. Andesha opened her eyes, and her eyes were filled with hatred. You can't do that. You will destroy our only hope, our only hope. You have already destroyed the hope of countless people. Look at this city, and the thousands of people who died in this war. If we don't do that, they will still die. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.